So noting that it's 7 p.m. on, where are we, August 23rd, 2023, I'll call the Board of Health meeting to order. And we also have a public hearing and an appeal hearing this evening. So before we get started with items potentially not anticipated by the chair 48 hours in advance of the meeting, first, since it's a Zoom meeting, we can announce our presence, each member. So Daryl Beardsley present.
Matt Beavers present.
Julie Dreyfus present.
Rebecca Honeywell present.
Okay, and then we have a number of items to consider for addition. Some of them are shown below. Let's see. Okay. So we have irrigation well A and irrigation well B at Laurel Farm Recreation Area for discussion, and then other issues. And we also have 3 new food permits to add. And Ellen, could you rattle those off faster than I can find them in my list?
They're here on the screen. Should be Off the Vine Catering, Tailgate Gourmet Catering for 2 separate dates.
Oh, sorry, I was looking at the old agenda. All right. And I also would like to add, we've had updated information about COVID put back on the town website, and we'll show you what that looks like just so you know that it's there. And we received notice of a ZBA hearing on September 6th, which is unfortunately the same date and time as our next meeting. But we may make some comments regarding what's on that petition. And so is that all? We mentioned the wells down below. Okay.
Yep.
So do we have a motion to add those to 7 items?
So moved.
Seconded.
Any other discussion? Hearing none.
Matt Beavers, aye.
Julie Dreyfus, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
And Daryl Beardsley, aye. Okay, so Matt, I'll turn the meeting over to you.
Sounds good. I think before we start with our first appointment at 7:05, I would just make a request, since we already have nearly 50 people on the meeting. If you're not on the board and not speaking, I might ask you to turn your video off. Whether it'll make a difference or not, I don't know, but we ran into a lot of slowdowns last time, so that would be helpful. And then, of course, if everyone could please stay on mute if you're not on the board and not speaking. Having said that, in 1 minute, we will open the first item. Is Tom here?
Yes, he is.
Present.
Thanks, Tom. I can't easily go through all of the attendees. And are is Josh Siskin present?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Oh, there you are. All right. All right, so with it being 7:05, I think our first appointment here is discussion regarding the food inspection at the Heritage of Sherborn. Tom, do you mind leading this off and just describing the situation?
Sure. So on July 28th, I conducted a routine sanitary inspection at the Heritage of Sherborn. I've included the inspection report. I believe they're uploaded into the docs for view of the board. We had some violations, including expired hood cleaning sticker, which is required to be done for grease emanating foods every 90 days. There was an ice machine with visible soils, a wall adjacent to the cook line with flaking paint. Previously, last February, there was a sprinkler pipe burst due to a frozen pipe situated above the cook line. And at that time, working with the building commissioner in an effort to get the business reopened, we tried to work with them on the condition that the areas, all affected areas would be cleaned and remediated, which they were in the immediate kitchen area. However, we still wanted the insulation above the drop ceiling above the kitchen to be removed and remediated. So we were under that general understanding. However, upon inspection in July, it was found that that insulation was still present above the kitchen area, and in fact growing mold, or what appeared to be mold. We had some outer opening issues with gaps around a window in the bakery, basement door with some visible daylight coming through. And then down into the basement in the walk-in cooler, there was a heavy presence of moisture collecting on floors. There was apparent evidence of mold growth, including mold, what appeared to be mold, growing on butter solids in that walk-in cooler. There was a standing bucket of water in the cooler, of what I presume to be condensation, with the condensation drain not being properly plumbed. There was some unnecessary article violations for things being stored, such as a mattress in the attic, trash not properly contained outside, a waste oil container that with visible soils. There was a minor infraction of a food worker without a hair restraint. We did cite for a management violation for not the assumption of lack of active managerial control, given the nature of the violations. I did conduct a follow-up inspection on August 12th, and we had some outstanding issues. There still was apparent soils on the ceiling of the walk, and it did seem that they had done a little bit of cleaning as far as the walls go. All the adulterated food from previously mentioned had been voluntarily discarded. Still, the insulation above the drop ceiling with what appears to be mold. The gap at the basement door, which I think has since been corrected. I'm in receipt of photos this evening. And yeah, some of the wall and ceiling surfaces still not cleaned of visible mold, at least on the ceiling and the walk-in cooler. There was a cake, I presume, for a imminent party that was in that walk-in cooler that wasn't properly covered, and there was some improper storage of some raw meat in the cooler that was not covered or protected. After subsequent conversation with Chair Beardsley, we drafted an order letter that was sent to the establishment on August 15th with conditions that shall be met or have to be met by today, including addressing persistent moisture in the basement. We've asked for an assessment by an environmental engineer to assess the viability and safety of keeping food in the basement, given the persistent presence of moisture, which could be groundwater, condensation, or both. We've asked for updated records of the exterior grease trap pumpings after consultation with Agent Orem, that we need to have those records readily available. And it's imperative that we have proper maintenance of the septic and the grease interceptor. And we've asked that all outer entry points be sealed, all doors be maintained closed to dissuade entrance of vermin or insects. And more importantly, that the insulation be removed above the kitchen. That area that was affected by that previous pipe burst be cleaned, remediated, restored, and any presence of mold be eliminated. That concludes my testimony at this time. I'll open it up to the board.
So I think the sort of key question is, have we received any of these requested items? namely the itemized invoice from the remediation service, the engineer's report, or sort of evidence of the doors being sealed. I haven't seen any of them, but I don't know if you've received them, Tom.
I did receive some photos tonight about the door was in fact sealed, from what was depicted in the photo. I received an estimate from an environmental engineer, pending a signature from the owner. And I believe that's all I've received to date, unless the owner has anything to add.
Wait,
I
one
apologize.
second. I think first I just want to see if there are any other questions from the board for Tom, and then we'll recognize you, Josh.
I don't have anything at the moment.
Neither do I.
Rebecca, any questions for Tom?
No questions, thanks.
All right, go ahead, Josh. Sorry about that.
No, so we've pretty much done everything that Tom has asked, or is in the process. The environmental engineer is coming this Friday. We were having trouble communicating with each other, getting each other, receiving emails, but he's coming Friday. He has that contract that Tom was talking about signed, and he is coming Friday. It was short notice, so that's the best they could do with the issues we had. The moisture in the walk-in, that's just missed ability on our part to solve the problem. There are multiple issues with the water in the walk-in, which we finally believe we solved. The drain pan was the last issue we had. After Tom, we replaced the drain pan, and then we thought that was the problem. And then once the drain pan was replaced, we thought it was all set, but we're still seeing water. We thought it was from ice that we use to keep our fish in. We keep ice, and then we have employees that change the ice and the melted ice daily. And so we thought they spilled a little, which we mop up, so the moisture's there. And then we realized that the drain pipe connected to the condensing pan was clogged, which we unclogged, and we finally had that running properly. And there is moisture a little bit just from the ice in there, but we've also turned down the temperature in the walk-in to help remove some more of the moisture without ruining some of the vegetables before they freeze. So it's sort of a tightrope to walk. I've asked my chef de cuisine, Sam, to come on this meeting today, and Kristen, who is in the front of the, runs the front of the house at Heritage, to help me with this. And I asked Jen, my wife, to come to help me with this as well. As far as the installation, that's a work in progress, going through Mass Save program. I've sent Tom some documents with my exchanges with that contractor group. The pictures of all the installation that Tom took, Tom, if you recall, the pipe burst was on the opposite side of the kitchen, so it'd be on the far wall closest to the pub. So all that insulation was never wet. It was all blocked by the hood and ductwork and chimney that stands in between the area that was soaked and the area that wasn't. I've been over there. I haven't seen any mold over there. All this insulation is closest to where the opposite side of the kitchen, not where the pipe burst. So most of that, I'm not an expert, but it looks like just dirt, dirty insulation. After I don't know how many years, the hoods have been cleaned. They didn't give us the sticker, but they were cleaned. I sent Tom the invoice. We put a hand sink out by the smoker at Tom's request. Like he said, we closed all the entry points. Tom, I believe you got our last inspection report from our pest control company, that they said there was no evidence of pests, mice, or any thing like that. I worked with him to close up some loose ends with them as well, but there was no evidence in that report. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, we did get that report. I think I've got it here. But I think the key question is, there are a few things we asked for in this letter. And one is the remediation of the insulation. 2 is the environmental engineer's report. 3 was the sealing the outer entry points, which it sounds like we have photos for that. And then finally, the pump records for the grease trap. And I guess I haven't seen any of those unless you have them to present tonight.
I sent the previous one to Tom, and the one was done 2 weeks ago, which I haven't received yet from Scott Septic.
This is the grease trap we're talking about specifically?
Correct.
Okay.
This was new to us. We had never had the grease traps. We've always had the grease traps cleaned outside, but there was no ordinance provided to us in 7 years. So this was from the pipe burst. I'm not sure why all of a sudden. We did a lot of work. The previous owners of the Sherborn Inn had sort of ignored the grease trap. So we
I think that's in the past. It sounds like you provided records. So it sounds like we're still missing the environmental engineer's report and then the remediation report. Is that fair?
Yes, the remediation report. Remind me exactly what that is. That is the removal or the testing and the sanitizing of the insulation.
Yep.
Yep. So I've been in touch with Service Master and another local company. And it's been difficult to get them to respond, but I've been working on that. It's not something I haven't done, but I just have no evidence of that other than missed calls and voicemails. And then the last item,
It's Friday.
this Friday. They're coming Friday. I'm happy to share that email.
So I believe though with the insulation, this happened in February. There was a time when there was a lot of damage happening in places from burst pipes.
Mhm.
So I know Tom was keeping up with you, communicating with you about that. And it's been a lot of time since then. And
I mean, Service Master did come through and we did remove, when we had to remove the ceiling tiles, we did remove some of the insulation, but Tom is correct. We do need to, and I had talked to Chris, the building inspector, about this. I said, obviously we can't close for 5 days. And then we waited I talked to Chris about getting the insurance money to do the work. And then we just received the insurance money in, I believe, June, or the last check was received in July. I'm not sure exactly. And then I started the process with Mass Save to have them do it, to do it all at once, to have remove it and then replace it. Because Chris had requested some fireproof insulation with special backing. But I guess if it's safe, we could do the removal before the replacement. I'm not sure. I'd have to check with the contractor about that.
Thanks. So I think
given that it's the summer, I would prefer not waiting.
Yeah. I think the question before the board here is that, we have had recurrent violations going back as long as I've been on the board. And I think, we drafted this order letter to suggest that perhaps it's time to vote on suspending the license if these things aren't complete. I mean, it sounds like the things we asked for aren't complete. And so I think the question for the board is do we sort of continue dragging this out and giving time? Or do we really want to say there are multiple hazardous conditions here and we should act on it? And the sort of tool we have is to suspend the license pending correction of the problems. And so I guess I'd like to hear other board members' thoughts on that.
Okay, I guess I'll go. I think maybe closing is a way to allow some time for these things to be remedied, since the other approach doesn't seem to have been working. It's not a path that we would like to take. I think the spirit of the Board of Health has always been just to help people get into compliance. And if they've missed like 310 CMR 15 about pumping grease traps, we try to educate about that so that really compliance is our goal and safety is our goal. But I think it's time to make sure that these things happen.
Are there specific remediation that's being asked for that would in fact require closure for the work to be done safely? That might be a question more for Tom, not to put you on the spot, Tom.
No problem. So the affected areas of the food establishment being above the kitchen would at a minimum have to be closed in that area in order for the work to safely be done. Obviously, we don't want ceiling surfaces and things being removed with dust particulates and other contaminants getting onto food contact surfaces or contaminating foods. We would want that area cornered off. At a minimum, the kitchen. So it's kind of the central work area for preparation of food is where this previous pipe burst took place. And I have a question for Josh about the location of the insulation. So correct me if I'm wrong, because I do remember responding to after the sprinkler pipe burst last February, and there was some open ceiling cavities above the cook line. So if I go up the attic stairs and I go to the right, so where is that insulation situated? I'm presuming it's above the kitchen.
It's above the kitchen, closest to where you would go up those stairs. So the pipe was on the opposite end. So it didn't see water on that end. None of the ceiling tiles needed to be replaced on the end closest to the stairs. It would be on the opposite end, closest to the pub. And it was blocked by multiple ventings and, like I said, chimneys and such.
Because it seems as though it goes pretty far over to where it could have been where the pipe burst, but at any rate, it does appear, and like you said, I don't know if it's soils, I don't know if it's mold or both, but certainly it needs to be assessed and, you know, given that there was a previous pipe burst in the vicinity.
Yeah, I really don't believe it came over just because of the stuff basically that is there, the venting. It didn't reach it over to the other side. It was pretty contained to that half. And then there's the hoods, you know, if you see the hoods in the middle, it was all on the other side of the hood. And I just like to say that I have addressed everything on here. The only thing that I hadn't done was the remediation and replacement of the insulation. When Chris and I spoke, the building inspector, I told him what my plan was and he agreed to it. And everything else has been taken care of. Everything has been, you know, this letter was received on August 15th and today's the 23rd. And I have someone coming Friday to find an environmental engineer, to get one to come, to agree to the contract and the price. We haven't done anything that Tom hasn't and the board hasn't asked us to do. He asked us to replace the mulch underneath the tent because it was dusting up and getting on everything. So
I think we don't need to review everything you've done in the past. I think we're
I think
aware.
it's important. I do think it's important because you're accusing me of things that I haven't done. So I do think it's important.
I'm only asking about the specific things in this letter.
Okay, and everything has been done or scheduled except for the insulation.
So then I think that's the decision for the board is I think what we have to decide is what's the right approach to that.
We just have to think of like some of the, you know, I mean, your decision is really important and we completely understand, but there's a lot of people in the community that are going to be affected by this decision. A funeral Friday, a bride and groom Saturday. I mean, we could close the restaurant very easily. People would be disappointed, sure, but this is a life-changing decision that you're making.
And you could,
I appreciate that. I think we all appreciate that.
and you could bankrupt
Appreciate
us
the.
as well.
Sorry, go ahead.
You could very easily bankrupt us as well. So if this isn't like you're giving us a lesson, this is killing our business.
100%.
I think we appreciate the gravity of the situation, and I hope you understand we don't take it lightly. I think it's frustrating that this keeps coming up, and it feels like
It hasn't kept coming up.
I feel like every time we get an inspection, there are issues to address, and we have a meeting and we have a delay, and I think that's what's getting frustrating for us.
I mean,
Is
I
that-
think it's
Every town, it's
every
every town and
restaurant.
every restaurant goes through this and we fix it. I've been a restaurant owner in Brookline for 20 years. Not once have I been called in front of the board. There is one restaurant in Sherborn and we're it. So we are under a microscope. So you can call, and I asked Di Wynn, who I have a great relationship on the Board of Health in Brookline, the health chief, I believe he's the chief health inspector. You know, he couldn't come on. He didn't feel like it was appropriate, but feel free to call him and ask him.
And we've had a restaurant that's almost been open 20 years and we have 2 restaurants in Brookline. So you have to understand we are doing the best and we are addressing every time something comes up to us, we address it. We are still dealing with the shortage of labor. Getting these people to come in is not easy. You can imagine how hard he's worked.
I think we appreciate all this. Like, we appreciate all this. I think in the end, we can't comment on what happens in Brookline, right? We can comment on what happens in front of us. You're not the only food permit we issue. You certainly are the biggest restaurant in town. I'll acknowledge that. And it's a complex operation. I think everyone understands that. And I think we all understand the impact on you, on your employees, on everyone in town from this. But I think at the same time, you know, we have our responsibility to ensure things are safe. And I hope you can also sort of appreciate our frustration.
I don't.
And
I had an agreement with Chris that we once we receive the insurance money, we would start the process, which we've done.
And I think, again, Chris Caney is the building inspector and he's not the Board of Health, and this is ultimately our responsibility.
Well, it was never discussed. I mean, Tom was there and I always thought it was through Chris. He was the one who requested the removal and replacement of the insulation. It wasn't the Board of Health, it was Chris. So that's who I dealt with. Tom was obviously aware, but Chris was the one who said, this is the deal. So that's who I was basing it off of.
Okay.
Um,
So, I mean, if your assertion is the Board of Health doesn't have jurisdiction, that's something else, but I think we do. And so I think we need to decide. I haven't said what we're going to decide, but I think we ultimately have to decide.
Can I?
And I think Tom, oh, sorry, Tom had a comment, I believe, maybe a clarification.
I certainly can't speak for Chris Caney, but I recollect that we work swiftly, we work collaboratively with Mr. Caney and the board to try to get you open as soon as possible, and empathizing and taking into account this incident being no fault of your own, but it was contingent on that insulation above that ceiling being replaced as soon as possible. And I understand there's mitigating factors of costs and recovering insurance money, but we also have to take into account public health and presence of molds in areas where your staff is, and you know, the guests that frequent your restaurant that you mentioned. Those things are urgent too. And this happened in February. So I think we were expecting it to be done prior to now, I think is what the consensus is.
But do you have anything that said that? Because that was not my impression. That I had told Chris and I had talked to him, like, you know.
I do have something that says it, and I have it in the inspection report history that I've uploaded for the board's reference, going back to a follow-up inspection, I believe in February. I have it with me. I can look it up, but it explicitly says it on the inspection report. It says it again on the inspection report that I mentioned from a couple of weeks ago. But we do have this documented in the inspection history, yes.
Okay. I mean, I just remember our conversation. I don't remember if you were there or not. I believe you were, but that's what I was basing my decision off of. But
I
Chris and-
believe there was an email exchange in the interim also asking about the status, and that's when you were referencing waiting for the insurance monies.
Mhm.
So can I, from the board, I just want to make sure that I clarify and target in where we are. So it's correct that the insulation is the only piece that has not been addressed.
The insulation and the engineering report on the, sorry, I'm on the wrong page.
With
The insulation has not
engineering-
been addressed, and then the report on the persistent moisture in the basement,
With-
which I understand is scheduled for Friday.
this Friday. And so for Josh, based on where you are in the process with the insulation,
Yep.
what is the timeline for remediation? Are you looking at a week, 2
I
weeks
mean,
from now?
I've just, I've been trying to hire a company to do it. And so I haven't had much luck, so I will keep pushing through with that. I'm not sure. I don't think I don't think it would be more than a day's job. It's a pretty simple thing. Remove, and then I guess the remediation would be the spraying if there's mold or not. And then, like I said, the inspector, the moisture has been taken care of in the basement and the walk-in. And then so I would say like 3 weeks, I'm guessing it should definitely be done by then. I can press to have them come out. I think with all the water in the area, people have been busy. So, but I think 3 weeks should be a safe bet.
And so
And are you talking about focusing on removal, at least at a minimum, to
Yeah,
get it
yeah.
out
Yeah,
and clean?
yeah. And we're doing all this without even knowing if there's mold present over there either.
And so to clarify, during that process, you would be closed for like a day.
Yeah, I'm not sure how long it would take, but usually they bring in a huge crew. They plastic everything, tape everything down. When they've done it after the flood, that's what they did. and then removal. They could do it from the top too, so there's less impact in the kitchen. Because I think they're gonna have to go up there anyway in the attic and do it, because there's places you can't reach by going up through the ceiling.
And so I think the options before the board are we suspend a permit immediately. That would be an extreme option. Options are we set a defined deadline to receive the remaining documentation. You might argue we'd already done that. But we've now had a chance to talk and we have more information on a timeline, and we could choose to set a defined deadline to have this stuff received. I think it's unlikely we'd look favorably on not receiving it by then. But I think we could do that.
I would be in favor of giving them a deadline. And then if that isn't met, then a consequence.
I'm torn. I mean, this letter specifies correction upon this meeting. And that hasn't happened.
It's a very quick turnaround. You have to understand in the way things move these days. That's a very quick turnaround from the date of.
It is, but I feel like this was found on an inspection about a month ago. And there hasn't been a lot of progress since then. And we do frequently hear, oh, it's just too quick of a turnaround to get it done.
There is progress.
Which is true. And there has been that's the only item that hasn't been where there isn't evidence of me contacting anyone or scheduling anything. That's the only item. Everything else, it has been addressed, but I've been upfront and honest about everything, and everything has been done.
Not the engineer's report either. About the
Scheduled for
moisture in the
Friday.
basement.
Scheduled for
Okay.
Friday. Happy to share that email with you.
What was scheduled for Tuesday, the 23rd? I was confused by that date, so I wasn't sure which.
Today's Wednesday, the 23rd. I'm not sure about.
I understand there was something you sent to us that referenced Tuesday, the 23rd. I'll have to look for it, but
Oh, maybe the outside grease trap cleaning, which was already done.
I don't have that here. All right, so I think there's no question that we need to set a deadline. The question is, when is that deadline?
I don't want one deadline for both. I'd like to think about what are somewhat aggressive timelines for these things to be taken care of. Tom, let's see, I can imagine that the basement's a little more complicated, but I think what's not complicated, what's happening Friday, is the identification of what the problems are. Is it really just the ice tray, or is there more to it? And that's what I'm looking forward to hearing from that report. And then maybe, so that one's a hard, I guess, just getting the report, if they're coming on Friday, and this is a one-day effort for them on site, and then some report preparation. I would think a week might be sufficient for that.
And Daryl,
Because
that's.
it's just talking about the report itself, the assessment, not about then what comes next after that report.
So the scope.
Uh,
Daryl, you were saying that the report will denote the scope of what needs to be done.
yes,
Am I understanding you correctly? Okay.
yes.
So for that portion of it, I'll pull up the letter again, being mindful of time because we're already late for our next appointment.
Yes.
And so we may have to continue this till later, or maybe we can try to wrap it up. So that report being the engineer's report of safety viability of storing foods in the basement. So this portion too, the goal will be to have that by September 1st, a week after the scheduled visit, which is scheduled for this Friday.
Correct. I don't foresee a problem with that.
And then we'll need to address whatever the necessary repairs are in a schedule for that. But we can't do that now because we don't know what that is.
Yeah. So report on the second portion by Friday, the September 1st. And then the next question is a timeline for basically the invoice from the cleaning contractor for removing and remediating the insulation. And it sounds like the hope for that is 3 weeks. So that would be 2 weeks later by Friday, September 15th.
Yep.
And then we have a meeting as a board on the 20th, which is the following Wednesday, in which we probably should plan to discuss this again. But I'd be open to those deadlines.
Okay, I'd like to ask Tom a question. So I'm assuming the insulation is really more of a space conditioning, heating, cooling kind of an issue as opposed to fireproofing, which would then be more of a fire department and building inspector issue. Would it be safe to say that we can just look, at least for this turnaround, that removal of the insulation and cleaning of the spaces is more important than, because here it says insulation shall be replaced. So to me, the objective is to get out whatever materials might be problematic and to get the area cleaned.
That's correct.
Is that appropriate?
Yeah, to satisfy our piece of it, certainly remove the questionable materials and remediate the area. And as you stated earlier, now is probably an appropriate time to do that before the colder months come in, and then that way the area will be clean and sanitary, and prepped for when the new insulation that's compliant with Mr. Canny's standards in the state building code can be put in.
Okay, and then probably I'd say if we voted on that, we should then check with Mr. County just to make sure that there's not a different safety issue associated with the insulation replacement.
Absolutely. I'll call Mr. Canny tomorrow and just get a brief from him on what exactly his expectations are. I certainly can't speak for him. So we'll assess that and I'll brief the board on that.
All right, so I think where I come down to here, I'll try to sort of make a motion to this. I would move that we require submission of the engineer's report on the basement storage by end of business on Friday, September 1st, and further require an invoice from cleaning and removal of the concerning insulation by end of business on Friday, September 15th, with a plan to then discuss on the 20th, if these items aren't received, about further actions to be taken.
I think the one tweak I might make to that motion is that the invoice that we receive is reflecting that the work has been completed as opposed to a prepay on the activity. Does that seem reasonable?
Yeah.
Okay, then I will move your motion with that addition.
I'll second with discussion. And the discussion would it be appropriate in our September 6th meeting to then discuss the engineer's report to be able to better articulate what we expect next?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, so we could add that as an agenda item when we get to that later for the 6th.
So a slight amendment to the motion where instead of discussing both of those issues on the, which meeting date was that? Was it the 15th? I'm sorry.
The 20th.
The 20th, sorry. That the engineer's report be discussed on the 6th, and then the installation be discussed on the 20th.
Okay. All right, Tom.
If I may, so assuming upon completion of the engineer's report, if there's an assessment made that that basement walk-in cannot be used for food storage, that we would probably need an alternative means to store the food safely in another area with ample refrigeration capable of holding below 41 degrees. So I guess that's for another time, but I would add that we should have a backup plan in place in case that is the worst case scenario.
Okay, so that would be more a note, I think, to the owners about, I don't know, are there portable units, mobile units that can be brought in for that kind of thing?
I
Much
think,
like you bring in an emergency generator, is there kind of a food storage unit to, or lease or rent or something?
I mean, I think the solution would ultimately be up to them. I think we, you know, we
Mhm.
should go through every possible contingency, but I think Tom's point is good that
Mhm.
obviously if the engineer's report identifies additional faults, then this doesn't sort of avoid us needing to address those. But I think that could be a thing we discuss at the meeting on the 6th.
Okay, so for the motion, since it's been the original and then I added something and Julie added something, should I move on Julie's last?
I think we probably should just restate it.
All right.
Okay.
Go for it, Matt.
So I think the motion is that we will require an engineering report on the status of the moisture in the basement by end of business on September 1st, with a plan to discuss that at the Board of Health meeting on the 6th. We further require a report on remediation of the insulation, documenting completion of that remediation by end of business on the 15th, with a plan to discuss that on the 20th. And we, of course, reserve the right to address other issues as they arise.
So moved.
Seconded.
Any further discussion at this point amongst the board? All right, hearing none. Matt Beavers, aye.
Julie Dreyfus, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
And Daryl Beardsley, aye.
All right, thanks. Thank you, Josh and Jen, for coming.
Right, thank you.
Hopefully we can make this work.
Thank you, Josh and Jen.
All right, we are currently very late for our 7:30 variance hearing on Morris Road. I saw Bob Truex here. I don't know if the owners are here. I have
And
a,
also,
have
looks
a-
like we might have some abutters too, so.
I will say we did get all the green cards, so
that
everything
was
set to open the hearing.
that was my next question. I see someone has raised their hand. I think we need to sort of move ahead and we can maybe have time later if that, I assume that question was about the heritage.
No,
So we
the question I have raised pertains to this variance request at 20
Okay.
Morse Road.
Okay, then there'll be a moment for those in a minute.
Okay, thank
We
you.
got to open the hearing first. All right, so we have all the green cards. Ellen, you said that, yes? So,
Yeah.
Yes,
okay,
That's
then I think we can go ahead and open the hearing. And then is Mr. Truex here to present the request? Bob, you're muted if you're trying to talk.
yeah, I see him, but he is muted.
Now you're unmuted. Bob, are you able to present the request here? I can't tell if Bob's trying to talk because he's cut off.
Yeah,
on my
I
screen.
can't either.
Can't hear him.
Rob, raise your hand if you're trying to talk.
Maybe he can't hear us, Matt.
Yeah, Robert, can you hear us? Yeah, you're clapping.
Yeah, it shows him as unmuted.
Yeah, we can't hear you.
You could call in, Rob, if you need to.
I think he's holding something up that I can't see and I still can't hear him.
That's good.
It's just off screen, Rob, so I can't see it. Are you able to call in so we can hear you?
Rob, try to reach my cell phone and I'll see if I can put a speaker on so you can be heard. I'm waiting for him to call. Okay, he's calling right now. Let me see if I can make this work. Rob, let me see if you can be projected onto the
My microphone on my computer is not working.
Okay,
It's saying it's an error. That's why they can't hear me.
yeah, but I have you on speakerphone right now. Board members, can you hear Rob?
Yeah, I can.
Yes.
Sorry.
Okay, go ahead, Rob.
Difficulties with my microphone on my computer. It's not working.
Okay, they can hear you now, Rob, because I have you on my end of it. So go ahead and present if you'd like.
This is a proposed upgrade for a septic system at 20 Morse Road. We're really just looking for one waiver from the local Board of Health regulations. We've done soil testing in the rear yard. We are looking to put in a new bleaching field. We're not doing any alternative. The soils in the area were clean sands and gravels, 2 minutes an inch per. However, the water table is from 30 inches to 36 inches from the surface. So we are building a mounded system, as you can see in the plan view. So we're looking for a waiver from the Board of Health for the requirement that the groundwater depth from the surface is less than 5 feet. And we're also asking to put a deed restriction in place for no garbage disposal. Other than that, there's no other waivers. We meet all the other requirements that we've seen, unless there's something we missed, but I don't believe we did.
I reviewed the plan. You haven't missed anything else that I can see.
That's pretty much it, Mr. Chairman. No other, really not much to present. Other than that, it's pretty straightforward. So I'll entertain any questions if you have any. Thank you.
Thank you. Nothing from me. Anything for anyone else on the board?
So the
Not-
property, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, Daryl.
The property looks rather flat. So I assume there's not someplace different that would offer greater depth to groundwater.
Did you hear the question, Rob?
Yes, no, there wasn't any other place we felt that we would get better depth.
Mhm.
It's good soils. It's very good soils. It perks really well. However, there is it's a low-lying area, so we have a high water table right there in the backyard. We didn't propose an alternative. I asked the client if they wanted to go with an Elgin and reduce the mound, but they didn't appear to want to do that. They wanted a conventional system, so we're not asking for any relief in that sense. So we do have 5 feet of separation from the bottom of the leaching field to the water table because it is 2 minutes an inch per.
And that would be required by Sherborn code anyways, but.
Yeah, the entitled, yes, and it's also required by your code, but it's also
Yep.
required by Title V in this instance.
That is correct.
Other questions from the board? All right, do we have any abutters present that have questions? Marianne?
Yes, this is Marianne Moore. I live at 16 Morse Road. And as an aquatic ecologist, I have serious concerns about this variance request. As the person who just spoke said, the soils in this part of Sherborn, they're the most porous soils in the town. They consist of sand and gravel. And the site of this septic system is less than 200 feet from Dowse's Pond, which drains into the Broadmoor Wildlife Sanctuary via Indian Brook. So I don't support this variance request.
Thank you. Nick Rodenhouse, comment?
Yeah, I too, well, Nick Rodenhouse, 16 Morse Road. I too think that this accepting this variance is unwise. Not only is it on a highly porous soils and the slope is downward to that pond, but also it would set a precedent in this area of the town, much of which is located on those soils. So the property is adjacent to a very large area that's in one of the 61 classifications, which could easily be converted to development land. And if this variance is given, then there's precedent for additional variances in similar kinds of soils, all draining into that pond. So I think, the town put its regulation in place, 5 feet, and that was a wise decision. I hope we stick to it.
Thank you. The system is being replaced because the current system's in failure, is that correct?
Go ahead, Rob.
That is correct. The system's in failure.
So I think one thing the board has always tried to do is ensure that what we're doing is an improvement on the current condition. And given that we have a current septic in failure, the current situation, I would argue, presents a greater threat to the sort of surrounding area than a replacement system. Further, I think, given concerns about new construction, the board doesn't grant variances for new construction. We do so only in the case of a replacement, and the rationale there is to do so in a way to improve the existing condition. And generally only grant variances if there isn't a better option. Mark, did you have a comment?
I don't, but I still have Rob online. The only thing I would note is that they're not increasing the bedroom count. They're replacing the existing septic system for a 4-bedroom house for a 4-bedroom septic system. They're not increasing the bedroom count.
Right, and the reason we have the variance is we prefer naturally deposited soils, and that is the case for new construction. But for homes that were built before those regulations went into effect, it would be considered unjust to not allow people to continue to use their home that was in compliance when it was constructed. And so we asked the engineers to only use the minimum number of variances, and this one is a very important variance because we do consider the separation from the bottom of the field to where the groundwater is encountered to be important. And you're right that the soils are going to transmit materials quickly. Unfortunately, there's not yet alternate technologies. We've been following them to see what kind of amendments could be made to address these kinds of permeable soils and to slow things down and promote more either biological or other kind of reaction, absorption dynamics. But that is being worked on at the Barnstable Research Center on the Cape and other places, with results still to come.
Rebecca?
Could the engineer comment for us on if this is the most effective type of septic system that could be placed? Could some of the risks be diminished with newer technology?
Go ahead, Rob.
This system, it meets all the Title V requirements. We're actually providing 5 foot of separation from the leaching field to the high groundwater. So we're giving an extra foot. If we were to use another technology, that would be reduced to probably 3 feet. But I think we're getting the greatest degree of environmental protection that we can get with this system. We are bringing in clean sand to mound it up. So it's going to have Title V sand under it. It's going to provide treatment of the effluent before it goes into the groundwater. And the fact of the matter is the existing system probably sitting in the groundwater right now, and we're not getting any pre-treatment before it goes to the groundwater. It's only 3 feet from the surface to the water table during the springtime, so that system's probably getting washed out every spring when the water comes up. So this is going to provide a much greater degree of environmental protection than currently exists on the site.
Yes, no, I understand that. My question is, what would give the greatest amount of environmental protection under these circumstances, in your opinion? because of some of the issues raised about the delicate environmental impacts, potential impacts?
I don't think there's anything out there that's going to give us any more than we're currently providing. The system is designed within all the code, Title V, Sherborn bylaws, Sherborn regulations. The only regulation we don't meet is really just the separation of groundwater from the surface of your local bylaw. That's not something that Title V even considers in their regulations.
All right.
I will note that, oh, sorry, go ahead, Matt.
No, go ahead.
I will note that Title V is written as a minimum standard for the state. So 5, I do believe, is absolutely appropriate here. Title V does not have to take into account the siting of these sorts of septic systems near wells. And so to require that in all municipalities wouldn't be appropriate. But that's why we have our requirement of 5.
All
And
right.
as I said, the naturally occurring soil. So what it's looking for is it doesn't meet that, but is providing it with sewer gravel.
All right. So I think with that, I'm going to move on to the variances, or the variance in this case. And so this is the request letter. And so I would, do I have a motion to approve a variance to section 8.02 to allow the soil absorption system to be installed in an area where the groundwater level was less than 5 feet from the natural surface grade?
So moved.
Seconded.
Any further discussion?
I can't say it's the ideal, but I think it's the best that we can do, given that this is a replacement of a failed system.
Yeah, I would agree that I think this represents a substantial improvement over the existing condition, and sounds like it's the best we can do.
Agree.
All right, so if there's no further discussion, Matt Beaver's aye.
Julie Dreyfus, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Daryl Beardsley, aye.
All right, so with that, we can close the hearing. Mark, are the plans ready for approval?
Yes, they are conditional to a deed recording. I'm getting feedback on the phone, sorry, but conditional to a deed recording for the garbage disposal.
All right, do I have a motion to approve the plans conditional to the garbage grinder deed recording?
So moved.
Seconded.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, Matt Beaver's aye.
Julie Dreyfus, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
And Daryl Beardsley, aye.
All right. Thank you, Rob. Thank you to the abutters. All right. Next, we are now only 9 minutes late for the 7:50 variance hearing at 81 Brush Hill Road. My understanding is that this application has been withdrawn, or at least they don't plan to go ahead tonight. Is that correct, Ellen?
They have not withdrawn it. However, the homeowner has indicated that she did not notify the abutters,
Okay.
that they are away on vacation, and they plan to, she actually requested to be on the September 6th agenda. And I said, we can't do that because she'll have to notify the abutters. I'll have to schedule a new hearing. But then the registered sanitarian, Eric Dickinson, noted that they also want to change the design to make it a 4-bedroom house. So we're at a standstill. I don't know where this has absolutely never happened before. I don't know what the board wants to do with it.
I can add to some of this. The first note is that I will be working with the registered sanitarian designer for this, because if they wish to add a bedroom, they can't do that if they need state waivers. So there may be the need to replace the well, and we can discuss that. The designer and myself, as well as he can present it to the board, but the state would not allow for an additional bedroom if they're going to need any local upgrades or waivers from the Title V codes. With that said, there's some other matters going on that I know that if the homeowners aren't here, we can discuss it maybe when they are here. It might be that we want to place the other two items on the agenda. That is the fact that they have notice on websites that this facility is up for rent, and this is a failing cesspool, and that we need to make sure, and I'm going to ask the board if they will allow for me to work with the chairperson to send them an order that says they cannot use that cesspool until it's replaced with a compliant septic system. And again, they're not here, so I think, you know, that notice I could send out, and then they have a right to a hearing if they so wish, with the order that I'm hoping to send out. And the other note is the fact that there was an investigation on that property per a DEP complaint that was sent to DEP. From there, it gets sent to us on the fact that they were pumping with a sump pump effluent out onto the ground, and the abutter complained because the effluent was going towards his property. So with all, and you do have the information right here on the agenda. With all that said, I don't have a problem with the fact that they can't notify the abutters by September 6th, but I think it should be on the agenda for discussion of the complaint and for review of the use of that property at the present time.
I think that all makes a lot of sense. I think certainly if they haven't notified abutters, we can open a hearing tonight, and they're not here to do it, so that's fair. But it does sound like we need to have discussion about this with them. I think it'd be reasonable for Mark to work with the chair, or it could be me if you'd like. We can sort that out to sort of work with in order about the use of the system. I note that the Title V inspection was dated. We received it in May 2022, over a year ago now, for the system in failure. And inspection itself was done at the end of April. So it certainly does seem appropriate that we sort of work, and we can do that offline with the chair about an order about not using the system in the meantime.
Okay, and if you can, scroll down to section 4 of B, a little bit more. And I think a little more, there we go. 4, system failure criteria. Backup of sewage into the facility, meaning into the home. And then on the next page, about liquid levels in the distribution box indicating clogging. Cesspool is sitting in groundwater, very important key. And then another, yes, below the high groundwater elevation. Where's the last one? Okay, so the system failed. Now, if you want, I can bring up our regulation, which will explain the order that we would want to send, because they're aiming for, or they're indicating rental availability as of September 1st. So that would be before our next meeting. And all right, let me just find the regs. I want to show you the
stop sharing
section.
if you want to bring that up.
Yep. Okay. Okay. So this is our section on cesspools and failure criteria. And it talks about what the timing of the replacement of a cesspool shall be. 1, if it's subject to sale, transfer, etc., it's within 12 months of the transfer. This was transferred in January of 22. So that would be January of, January of 23. That would be January of 24. However, B is the key issue here. If it is failed due to above ground sewage, we didn't see that in that Title V report. backup into the structure served. That was noted as a failure, and it's in groundwater. So it meets two of those criteria, and therefore it should be replaced immediately. There might have been a little bit of an exception because the house was vacant for some amount of time, but they were working on it as early as April of this year. And I'm going to assume using the water and the facilities inside the house for wastewater disposal. So it has been in use. I think it should be the order I envision and that Mark has drafted is that they should proceed with the replacement immediately and that the building not be occupied and thus not use the system that's there until that's completed. Because this is urgent. The cesspool sitting in groundwater is a big deal.
I think that makes sense. Thank you, Daryl, for sort of clarifying the timeline.
And I'll stop sharing.
So I think it sounds like a couple things to do. I think we need to sort of authorize the agent to work with the chair or vice chair to draft and send this order, and then we'll need to just add this to our next agenda so that the homeowners could be here, so we can sort of have a chance to discuss with them. I don't think we can decide whether we want to be an appointment or not, but I think first I would just move to authorize Mark to work with the chair or vice chair to draft an order indicating what Gerald just described.
Seconded.
Any further discussion on that point? Hearing none, Matt Beaver's aye.
Julie Dreyfus, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
And Daryl Beardsley, aye.
All right. So the next, I think we should just make sure we add this to our agenda for the 6th, which at one point I knew what was on it, but now I don't. Is Ellen still here?
Yes.
Ellen, I keep hoping you have to run off, but
Yeah.
I'm glad you haven't.
Yeah, not yet. Yeah, there's 3 variance hearings already scheduled, 7:30, 7:50, and 8:10. And then you have the heritage. So did you want this 81 Brush Hill Road as a timed appointment or just?
I think I would be fine with it being not timed, and we'll just try to sort of address it quickly if they're there, unless others think it'd be better to give it a time slot.
I think that's reasonable.
I agree.
All right, so I think we can just add it to chair's business, and then we'll try to address it early on if they can come, but it'll be good to let them know that they should be there.
Okay. Yep.
All right. Let me get back to our agenda. Give me 1 second. All right, hopefully everyone can see my screen again. I don't think we'll ever stop asking that, no matter how long we have Zoom. All right, we are back on track in 1 minute. I don't think we can achieve anything else in that 1 minute.
No, I don't think so.
And now it's 8:10, so the minute's over. Okay, so we are now on to the continuation of the public hearing on proposed regulation changes. We had previously discussed all of the changes in regulation 1. We, I believe, are part of the way through regulation 2. One question I had was whether it made sense to go back and vote on regulation 1, because this is now dragging on for months. It sounds like that would cause a lot of administrative headache. In terms of it's just much easier to submit all the changes at once, because they'll need to be typed up and published and everything. And so I think we probably just need to proceed with talking about these. Given the 20 minutes we have, I would be fine to get through as much as we can get through. I think one other thing I might bring up is to judge whether the board has appetite for potentially having a separate special meeting to just address these. I'm just concerned we've been, discussing them for now 2.5 months, which follows on a 6 month to year process of drafting them. And I just would like to get some of them either enacted or not. So how do people feel about trying to schedule a separate meeting for that?
I think it might be easier.
I would be in favor of having a meeting focusing on the regs.
I completely agree too. I think that being able to do it in a way that we can actually discuss it comprehensively for what remains would make the most sense for both the board and for anyone who is participating.
So I guess the other question is whether we should just schedule that and continue it now to that rather than doing it piecemeal here, which, as much as I hate to do that, is maybe the right thing to do.
Right, we do have a number of things that we could fill in this time until the appeal hearing.
So to do that, I think we need to schedule something because we need to continue it to this particular
Yes,
time.
we need to open and then,
We need to open it. Well, no, we don't need to open it because it's continued. Right?
okay.
Am I
Can
correct
we
in that, Ellen?
reopen it? No?
Yeah, I think you can discuss when you would continue it to, then open it and formally vote to continue it.
Okay.
At date and time.
All right. Should I throw out a time?
Would you stick
Sure.
to Wednesday or not?
I'm not wedded to it, but it seems like that generally works for people. We have an opening September 13th on a Wednesday or the 27th on a Wednesday. Would either of those work for people?
I'm not voting or anything, but
Mhm.
I could not do the 13th.
Okay, well, that's important.
But I could do other days of the week too.
Yeah, I could do other days also. I mean, I will also note that the 13th and the 27th, I am post-call, which means I will have worked overnight the night before. So I'll sleep all day and wake up to do regular review if I have to, but.
All right, let's pick a different day of the week.
Yeah, a Tuesday would work for me.
I can't do Tuesdays because I'm actually on call on those Tuesdays.
When are you on call, the month?
I'm on call, I'm in house overnight on the 12th and 26th. And I'm on call the 19th.
What about earlier
Uh,
month?
meaning like on a Tuesday earlier in the month,
Yeah,
meaning the 5th.
maybe there aren't very many.
Yeah, we're sort of running out of Tuesdays, and I'm a little
Yeah.
reluctant to have a meeting on the 5th and then a meeting the following day on the 6th. What about like Thursday the 14th or Thursday the 28th?
Thursdays are hard for me, but
Did you skip the 21st on purpose, Matt, the Thursday?
Only because we will have had a meeting the night before, and I'm also on call.
Yeah.
yeah. What about the first week of October? Is that too far?
Do you think it could be possible to put it on the meeting of September 20th?
I think we need to have a separate meeting for this, is my worry.
Okay,
We keep trying to have it in regular meetings, and it keeps getting pushed out by variance hearings and everything else.
All right, you know,
Unless-
except for the fact that we've already chewed through some time, I would say we just keep plugging along.
You might want to
But-
start the meeting at 6 on the 20th and call it a working session.
How about a Monday night?
That would be fine too.
The 18th?
I could do the 18th.
I could. I'm on call, but call from home, so I can risk it.
Hold on.
Yeah, that could work for me.
Or the 11th?
I could,
Yeah, I'd almost prefer the 11th because then it's not 2 meetings in a week.
Yeah, the 11th.
Is that a holiday or anything? I don't have holidays.
It's
on.
No.
Day of observance, but I do have a city council meeting that night, so I wouldn't be able to be
Oh.
there.
Mm.
I was going to suggest, I think Rebecca mentioned October. Ellen, do we have any variances? We could, you could have one meeting as a working session and the other meeting for variance hearings, but in October.
Yeah, but
possibly.
that depends, Mark, on when plans are received.
No, I understand.
Yeah, I couldn't guarantee that nothing would be scheduled.
Just an idea to have a working session on one of the 2 meetings in October.
Yeah. I would vote for the first week of October.
I mean, I guess we could plan to
But
start that
you-
meeting early at
We have
6.
a meeting the first week of October.
Yeah,
Hmm.
so we could try to start the meeting early at 6 PM and just schedule reg review for the first hour. Then it's just one night that we were already planning on being there.
Yeah,
That would work. We're talking about the 4th of October?
Yeah, the 4th of October, just moving the meeting to 6 PM and starting the hearing at 6 PM and then
Okay,
going with it until we have an appointment.
okay.
All right. I get some sense of consensus. So let's then open the continuation of the hearing. Do we need to vote to do that, Ellen?
yeah, I don't, well, you can, just to be safe.
Okay, so do I have a motion to open the continuation of the public hearing on regulation changes?
So moved.
Seconded.
Any discussion? Presumably none. Matt Beaver's aye.
Julie Dreyfus, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
And Daryl Beardsley, aye.
All right, so then can I have a motion to immediately continue the public hearing on regulation changes to 6 PM on October 4th? Or let's say 6:05 PM on October 4th.
So moved.
Seconded.
Any further discussion? Hearing none. Matt Beaver's aye.
Julie Dreyfus, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
And Daryl Beardsley, aye.
All right, so that is continued. Okay, so we have 12 minutes before the 8:30 appointment. And so I think we should start trying to move through some other business. Why don't we try to do some food establishment permits?
Mhm.
Looks like,
Tom did have to leave, but he texted me that he does recommend approval of all of the food establishment permits listed, all contingent on compliance with the applicable regulations.
okay. All right, so we have Off the Vine Catering. This is going to be at Silverwood Farm on,
And if I can just add a comment, I've been talking with Tom as well as the building commissioner on the use of Silverwood Farm. This event would have to happen without the use of the barn because the barn's not approved for any use outside of the hired hands. So that includes the setup. They wanted to use the kitchen. That kitchen's not for setup kitchens for events of catered events, that is. It's only for the hired hands. So maybe there should be a note that this is to be held, at the tent and as a mobile event. They have to bring in their own hand washing sinks and so forth and porta toilets, because right now that building is still not approved for any type of use outside of the people that work on the farm.
all right,
Yeah,
and
and we did receive a note from the food manager at Silverwood, who indicated that we've seen the documentation that they said they provide to any of the caterers and mobile food trucks coming to Silverwood about the lack of availability of the facilities in the barn. And so they're still apparently working on that, since this came as a surprise to a number of vendors recently. And Tom said he will be checking on them on Saturday, which is a wedding also there.
all right, and so presumably that those stipulations would apply to all of the Silverwood Farm events.
Yeah.
So why don't we then sort of work our way through these? So do I have a motion to approve the temporary food establishment permit for Off the Vine Catering for 9/2/23 at Silverwood Farm, pending compliance with all applicable laws and non-use of the barn?
So moved.
Seconded.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, Matt Beaver's aye.
Julie Dreyfus, I.
Rebecca Honeywell, I.
Carol Beardsley, aye.
All right, do I have a motion to approve the temporary mobile food vendor permit for Tailgate Gourmet Catering on 8/6/23, 8/26/23 at Silverwood Farm? Conditional on all applicable compliance with all applicable laws and non-use of the barn.
So moved.
Seconded.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, Matt Beaver's aye.
Julie Dreyfus, I.
Rebecca Honeywell, I.
And Daryl Beardsley, aye.
All right, and then the same motion, can I have the same motion for Tailgate Gourmet Catering for a temporary mobile food vendor permit on 10/14/23?
So moved.
Seconded.
No further discussion? Matt Beaver's aye.
Julie Dreyfus, I.
Rebecca Honeywell, I.
Carol Beardsley, aye.
Great. All right.
You also kept the Council on Aging.
Yep. I was going to go there next. So we have the Council on Aging for a permit for approval. Do we have any comment? And then they also have a fee waiver request. Is that correct?
Yep.
Did Tom provide any comment on this one?
He's recommended approval, but then he left up the fee waiver too.
Okay. And so the fee waiver request is that effectively this is a service to local residents and run by the Council on Aging, and given their limited funds and it's a service to the community, they requested that we waive the fee.
So that little note about public institutional nonprofit, I don't know that that necessarily applies to government automatically, which is why we're being asked about the fee waiver, just as a reminder. I have talked to the advisory board and town administrator and select board in the past about what should we do about interdepartmental exchange of fees. So there are clearly costs to the Board of Health, but the fees that come in go into a general fund. I just would like to have a decision from someone in town as to whether it's viewed as an overall cost savings, that less time is being spent on moving this around. So I'm for that. I've also asked, though, that we not, as a Board of Health, we not be penalized for why is it taking more time to deal with more food permits. And we've had a huge increase recently in the last year or so, certainly with the mobile food trucks, as we've discussed before. So some way of tracking, and Ellen's begun with some methods of tracking the types of permits that we're issuing, which she's always done, but expanding the categories.
So it sounds like we don't have an answer on that. I mean, I'm sort of in favor of minimizing just excess accounting, which I think makes sense. I mean,
right, again is, oh, go ahead. Ellen had collected some information that it's a surprisingly high proportion of permits are going to town groups. So it would change. Again, the money doesn't go straight into our budget, but in terms of the amount of defense that we have to mount every year at advisory to explain expenses, as long as we're tracking it so they know that the reduced revenue could have been offsetting the added costs of these additional efforts that the board has. But I think there's another way to deal with it. I agree on the efficiency side.
Any thoughts from anyone else?
So Daryl, is there a decision from, say, advisory pending, or not necessarily? I didn't quite understand if.
Yeah, it's unclear. it's on their radar. I brought it up. I think one of the things that happens is with the mandatory turnover in advisory, that institutional knowledge gets lost. So this won't be the first go round we've had trying to resolve this. So, and it's flip flop back and forth at times. And so, yeah, nothing clear at the moment.
All right, so I think two things to act on. One is let's just do the easy one first, which is the food establishment permit. So let's, approval was recommended, and so I have a motion to approve the food establishment permit for the Sherborn Council on Aging, conditional and compliance with all applicable laws.
So moved.
Seconded.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, Matt Beaver's aye.
Julie Dreyfus, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
And Daryl Beardsley, aye.
And so then next, I'd be fine to move that we waive the fee for this food application permit, but that we at least keep records of each time we do waive such fee for an entity in town.
I
So
agree.
moved. Okay.
Okay, so we have a motion. Do we have a second?
Second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, Matt Beaver's aye.
Julie Dreyfus, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
And Daryl Beardsley, aye.
All right. Is there anything we can do in 3 minutes?
The updated COVID
Sounds
information
good.
on the website.
That's here somewhere, isn't it?
And I would
There
have
we
been
go.
at the end. Yeah.
There we go.
Okay. So there was an issue in town about possibly someone who was affected by COVID and questions about what return to work protocols are. And so there is guidance from the DPH. There's also guidance from Center for Disease Control. And Ellen said she's taken a look at the calculator that the CDC has and found it quite useful for understanding how one manages isolation when you have COVID. And then we just included some other links. And during COVID, we had pages and pages of information, and now we have this. So, and that's partially because now these other groups are tracking things in real time about what's going on. The other one I'd suggest if people were really interested is to take a look at the MWRA wastewater data about levels, because it is showing that there is a rise, a very clear rise in COVID again. And that might be something that we want to talk about in terms of, are there things that this board wants to do to, again, reach out to Dover to see how we might be coordinating around the schools, or perhaps DESE, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, is well-versed in this now and will be taking over something in that regard, since school is coming and the increase is there and cases are rising with the new variant. And also there's been some reporting that symptoms may appear before the antigen tests work for detection.
So I think just noting the time also, I think that
Yeah.
This is good in that we're citing other people. I worry about being duplicative and having something that comes out of date. And so I think this is a reasonable way to do it, to cite other people. I don't know that we're at a place yet where we need to sort of expand our actions. I will note that hospitalizations, particularly for severe hospitalizations, haven't budged. We're continue to see more people who come in with it than rather from it. So I don't know that we're at a place where we need to take further specific action yet, but I think continuing to monitor it makes sense.
I agree with that, Matt.
All right.
Okay, and I'd also say we can think about whether there'll be a departmental meeting coming up, so the board can think about input into that and whether we are advising the town to follow the guidelines. Again, nothing is mandatory at the moment, but the guidelines are, I think, pretty balanced. And so we could just chat about giving some direction to the town.
Yeah, I think reasonable to ask the town to follow current DPH and CDC guidelines. I don't know that I want to go beyond them.
Mhm.
I would agree with that as well. It seems to have a nice succinct message.
Mhm.
All right. If no further discussion on that, it is now 8:31. And so we have next on the agenda, the appeal hearing regarding our 621 approval of a bedrock disruption permit for 39 Wildwood Drive. I know we have a number of people here for that. Do we have the council representing the appellant and the homeowner here?
Excuse me, Matt, you should vote to open the appeal hearing. The board should vote.
Okay. Can I ask if they're here before I open it or?
Yep,
Okay.
sure.
Okay.
Good evening, members of the board. Damon Seligson, I represent the appellant.
Thank you, Damon.
Good
We have
evening, members of the board. Arthur White, I represent the homeowner Eduardo and Michelle Rosa.
All right. Thank you. Thank you both.
You're welcome.
Matthew Brooks, I'm working with the complainants on the dispute.
Okay. All right. So with that, do I have a motion to open the appeal hearing?
So moved.
Seconded.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, Matt Beavers, aye.
Julie Dreyfus, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
And Daryl Beardsley, aye.
Great. So just want to sort of give a little bit of a process overview here first. I think following our practice from sort of last time we did this, which I think is the only time we've done this, step one will be just ensuring that the sort of requirements for an appeal have been met. And if that's true, then we'll proceed to discussion of the materials submitted. I'd like to suggest that we open with 10 minutes of opportunity for each of the representatives to speak, beginning with Mr. Seligson and then followed by Mr. White. And then after that, give the board an opportunity to discuss and ask further questions. Does that sound reasonable to everyone?
That's reasonable. Thank you.
All right. So I want to pull up
Matt, for
yeah.
housekeeping, I will give people a 2-minute heads up when they're getting close to their time. Does that work?
That works. I was hoping I had here the regulation regarding the appeal hearing, but I don't think we do, but that's fine. I think the sort of, to just make it easy, I think one of our requirements for an appeal, I think our key requirements for appeal is that it's filed in a timely fashion, which we discussed last time, and that the appellants file, one of the options for criteria is filing at least 3 reports by experts. I believe we did receive 3 reports by the deadline we stated last time, which was August 7th. So in my mind, we've sort of met the criteria to open the appeal hearing. So I guess just to be thorough about it, the hearing's open, but I would like a motion to consider the appeal, understanding that the requirement of providing additional expert opinion has been met.
So moved.
Seconded.
Any further discussion on that? Hearing none, Matt Beavers, aye.
Julie Dreyfus, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Daryl Beardsley, aye.
All right. And so with that, Mr. Seligson, would you like to begin?
Thank you, Dr. Beavers. Members of the board, for the record, Damon Seligson with the law firm of Sheehan, Finney, Bass and Green in Boston. I represent Ratna Narayanan and Narayanan Palliseri, who are the owners of 23 Wildwood Drive in Sherborn, and they are the appellants. We're here because they are appealing the decision of this board dated June 21, 2023, which was granting approving and granting a permit to Mr. Rosa to perform bedrock disruption at his property, 39 Wildwood Drive, which is the abutting property to my clients. We are proceeding under Article 11 of your regulations. On July 19th, the board established a deadline for us to submit materials by August 7th, 2023, and we have done that. We submitted a letter on August 7th with 15 exhibits, including reports from Mr. Scott Horsley, who is a water resources consultant, a report from Brian Moore, Carriage House Consulting, who is an expert in his area. We've submitted a letter report from Professor Timothy Downs of Clark University. We've submitted a letter report from Dr. Mark Dershowitz. We've submitted at Exhibit 13 a bedrock analysis which shows the existence of manganese at my client's property. We've submitted supplemental information on the 9th of August, which I asked the board to take into its record, including a report from Dr. Scott Maybe, a state geologist. In the interest of time, because these reports are incredibly detailed and are sort of beyond my pay grade. I'm an attorney and I'm not a geologist or a professor or a toxicologist or a chemist. Those reports speak for themselves, and those experts are here tonight. So if you have questions, or if I can sort of tee up those folks to present areas that are more pertinent to their area, I'd like to do that. But I would like to say that this board has the authority legally to regulate the bedrock disruption that happens in your town. I point you to your own regulations, your permit requirements in coming before the board to get such a permit. There are specific requirements that the petitioner must show. It would make no sense that if the petitioner must show certain requirements to get a permit, that the board would not have the ability to deny that permit. It speaks for itself. The language at section 10 of the bedrock disruption language is mandatory. It uses the words shall repeatedly. The permit shall be required. The permit shall not be granted except where certain requirements are shown. And we submit that the information that we've presented in the appeal that was not before the board at the hearing when the decision was granted is significant. There is manganese from the bedrock analysis that we had done on the 21st of July. That is at Exhibit 13. There is known undisputed scientific evidence that manganese, if it leaches into and contaminates water, has significant issues for people's health. Sherborn is a community that has 100% of its water that comes from private wells. My clients have a legitimate, very, very reasonable concern that the bedrock disruption that's going to occur at this property next door is going to cause manganese to affect and contaminate the water. One person getting sick is one person too many. It's the board's duty to vet the proposed project and be satisfied that the health, welfare, and public safety of the community is protected. That's what the bylaw requires. That's what the purpose of the bylaw states. We submit that if this is approved and allows Mr. Rosa to proceed, that is going to happen. The scientific evidence, as stated, requires is concerning in terms of what health risks will and can result. Birth defects, neurological compromise. Dr. Honeywell, who is on your board, explained at one of the hearings that there can be irreversible neurotoxicity allowing Mr. Rosa to disrupt the bedrock without satisfying the board, as our experts say has not been done, creates a precarious, troubling concern for my clients and your community at large. And I think it's the board's duty to protect the community, to protect the water supply, which is used for drinking, for cooking, for washing, and that you have the power and the duty to regulate it as the bylaw states. The subsection 10 of the regulations addresses bedrock disruption. Section 13 deals with the submittal of requirements for an earth removal standards. You have the authority under your regulations. You have the authority to do it under the facts here. And we submit that you should reverse the decision and deny the bedrock disruption permit for the reasons that our experts set forth in the submission that we've supplied. I have Scott Horsley here. He is a water resources consultant with over 30 years of professional experience in this area, in the fields of hydrology and water resources management. And his report, which is included at Exhibit 1, says that the proposed project includes significant areas of bedrock removal and poses a potential risk to neighboring properties. He's here and he can testify to the board. The proposed project will result in earth removal in excess of 350 cubic yards and therefore requires an environmental health impact report. 187 cubic yards of bedrock are going to be removed and disrupted as a result of the requested permit. Brian Moore is here and he has submitted a report that we've included at Exhibit 2. Again, Professor Timothy Downs is here, and he has stated in his capacity as an environmental health scientist and researcher whose expertise includes the risks of exposure to moderate to high levels of manganese in drinking water. His report is included at Exhibit 3. Dr. Mark Dershowitz, who is a PhD in pharmacology. One of his areas of expertise is toxicology. He's written a report that we've included at Exhibit 4. He's a resident, at least a former resident of Sherborn, if not still. And he states at page 2 of his report, the owner of the property at 39 Wildwood has proposed to use his own well to assess whether the bedrock disruption results in groundwater contamination. This proposal has no scientific validity whatsoever, because since no one knows the directions of flow of subsurface waters, it's just as likely that the local water flow will carry contaminants away from his well as it is to contaminate his own well. So those are the positions that we present to the board. The board did not have them earlier. There are at least 3 additional reports. There are at least 17 additional families, residents of Sherborn that have joined the opposition, that in addition to what we submitted in at the time we filed the appellate materials, and I will supplement those so that your record is complete tomorrow. I'm happy to answer any questions that the board may have, or at least direct those questions to the appropriate folks who are here, who have the expertise that are in these areas.
Thank you, Mr. Seligson. I think before we proceed with questions, I would like to hear from Mr. White.
Thank you, Chairman Devers.
I'm the vice chair. I was in charge, but that's okay.
Okay. As my brother has indicated, I also am not an expert in toxicology or geology. However, the board first heard this application for the bedrock disruption permit on June 7th. I've reviewed the minutes. It was a well-reasoned hearing. Neighbors were given an opportunity to participate and provide their input. The matter was continued for 2 weeks till June 21st. At that hearing, similarly, many neighbors spoke. The board had much information before them. The board issued a permit. My client did all that was required under the bylaws. He notified all of the neighbors. He appeared, his engineer appeared, answered questions, and the board issued the permit. There is no reason that that permit should either be revoked or taken away from Mr. Rosa. Despite all the letters, all the exhibits, all the information that has been presented, it's a well-known fact that manganese is a valuable mineral that exists. It exists in water. It's necessary for the health of all persons. Certainly excessive amounts may not be. There is no proof as to what's going to happen when my client starts his project. He has indicated in prior hearings there will be no blasting. Everything will be done by hammering. He will remove all rocks and all debris from the site the day that they are disrupted. He will cover all areas that are affected during the process of the house construction and digging of the well. He has relocated the house to significantly reduce the amount of disruption that will take place. The board cannot and should not, based on hypotheticals, make decisions. There is absolutely no proof that what is going to be done at that site is going to impact any of the neighbors. My understanding is that much of the area, many of the homes on Wildwood Drive have ledge. And when they put in their houses and or their wells, bedrock was disrupted. It's only through this new regulation that there's the need to acquire a permit from your board. My client has hired a very well-respected company to dig wells. They've dug over 4,500 wells, have never had any problems with an excessive amount of manganese. My client, a longtime resident of Sherborn, his wife and his family have spent a lot of money to acquire this property, to relocate, to provide a better quality of life for his family. They've met on numerous occasions with the neighbors. They've tried to address their concerns. They will advise them as the process goes forward. They will take steps to minimize and ensure a safe construction site. And at this stage, to do anything on this appeal would not be well-founded. I'm satisfied that the board took everything into consideration on June 21st. 60 days later, the situation hasn't changed. We did not go out and try to hire dueling experts because to some degree it would be hypothetical. We don't know what's going to happen. We know that we're going to put in a safe project. The Shang, the engineer, has submitted on the 17th of this month, when the homeowner was given an opportunity to file any rebuttals, a rather thorough letter with exhibits. He is here and available to speak if the board feels compelled or wants to hear from the experts. But I think the board needs to leave everything as is and deny the appeal and leave the permit in place. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So at this point, I'd like to proceed with discussion from the board, which can include questions to the experts or the attorneys as needed. If it's all right, I'd like to just sort of begin with my thoughts on the matter. In reviewing all the materials provided, and I appreciate the effort that went into providing all these materials, and I did have a chance to review them in detail. I can sort of break down the information provided into a few categories. There was substantial information provided on the potential toxic effects of manganese. I don't think that's in dispute. I'm certainly aware of those potential toxic effects, and I don't think I think the board generally is. In addition, there were a number of materials provided to provide evidence for the presence of manganese in the bedrock and in ledge, and for the potential for disruption of rock to lead to release of substances. I similarly don't think that that's in dispute. I think we all acknowledged all of that. I think a third category, there were some materials that I think are not sort of exactly germane to the discussion of bedrock of disruption, which is what this is. There were sort of questions about other issues that I think we'll address later when we talk about the septic plan, but I think we should focus this on the bedrock. And so then, I go back to our regulation, which I'll pull up here, and the requirements for our regulation. And this was put into place a few years ago before my time on the board. And I think the key components of this are that a permit is required. It had not been previously, but it is. And then it lists the requirements for that permit. The main requirement being notification of abutters. I haven't heard anything that suggests that notification didn't take place. My understanding is it did. We've seen the notification. It looks like that followed the procedure. The next issue regards blasting. There's been no proposal for blasting here, and so there's no additional review there. And then it finally says that we won't issue a permit unless these have been completed. And so my understanding is that the completion of the above is not in dispute. And so that's where we're left. And so I think on the one hand, we could say they met the requirements. I haven't seen anything that suggests they didn't. And based on our regulation, therefore, the permit stands. I think that's one view of it. I think beyond that, I think to be clear, I don't know that we need to consider it further than that. But I think to just comment beyond that, because the issue is raised, is what is the potential for actual harm here, and the potential that this will cause sort of certain and non-speculative harm to the appellant. And I think we've seen from comments from the experts and comments from the appellant themselves that we can't be certain what's going to happen. We can't be certain if monitoring the on-site well is going to detect something. We similarly can't be certain if it's going to manganese will travel to a neighboring well, and so therefore I think anything else is speculation. And I think others who were on the board at the time of this could comment, but I think that was the goal of this: is that we weren't able to come to a place that prohibited bedrock disruption, and we haven't. What we were able to do is come to a place where we required notification, so that which goes above and beyond what was here privately and what's present in other towns, so that neighbors could be aware this is happening and they could look for this because it's potential, which I think we agree, but it's not certainty. And so that's where I stand on all this. And I think I'd like to hear, I know we have some hands raised, but I think we need to sort of have a discussion for the rest of the board first before we go on to someone else. So anyone else from the board have comment?
I have some comments.
Go ahead.
And I was on the board when our first experience with ledge disruption led to a consequence that was measurable to affect a down gradient abutter. And that was 4 years ago. So unfortunately, it's unclear why it took so long to write a regulation. This regulation was actually only just put into effect right before you joined the board. But my comments are, we have, although we have this first regulation, I think that we could improve it. And as a Board of Health, we have the responsibility to act on the information that we have for the best interests of the public health of the town. This happens all the time in clinical practice. You may know this as a practicing physician. Sometimes you have to go by your instincts and make a decision that's best for the patient with the information that you have at hand. In this case, we have historical data, although there's a paucity of data in this country. We have historical evidence that in developing countries where mining activities take place, there has been identified heavy metals, manganese, lead, and other toxins in drinking water and groundwater. In our town, we also have lots of evidence of the neurologic consequences that are harmful of exposure in drinking water of children to manganese. Our Sherborn homeowner and her entire family, all of the children, were exposed to levels of manganese which were 40 times the EPA limit. That's not insignificant. And unfortunately, this is where this is uncharted territory, but it doesn't mean we don't have the responsibility to be cautious. And in this particular case, in reviewing the material, it appears that the homeowner analyzed her own rock. That was incredibly intelligent, and we have objective data. So I don't think that we can say that we don't have any evidence that there could be risks introduced. And pulverizing rock and crushing it with heavy equipment that we now have available to us is going to facilitate the leaching of that material into the water after a few rainstorms. It's going to be it'll be impossible to remove it. So what can we do? We can't regulate the homeowner, but we need.
That's what I know. I'm still waiting. Whoops, sorry.
We can't regulate the homeowner, but what we can do is we can take some measures to protect the abutters and the town aquifer and the water supplies as a whole. We can ask them to do monitoring. We can ask them to put monies aside that could be used in the future to remediate. We can require removal of the materials as it's disturbed, but we also can be smarter and a little bit more cautious, because we as a Board of Health are supposed to be thinking about public health. That is our interest, and we have evidence to this effect, but we have extremely limited solutions once the damage is done. And I think we need to be smart and proactive and conservative, because it's just not worth the risk. That's sorry, I'm not.
Thank you, Rebecca. I was just trying to come off
stand.
mute. Thank you, Rebecca. I appreciate that.
Can I
Comments from other members of the board?
Can I follow up with a question to Rebecca?
Go ahead.
Rebecca, I know it was only, I think, 2 of the current members who were actually on the board at the time this regulation was passed. And so having been there, having helped written this regulation, what was the intent?
The challenge the biggest challenge at the time was perceived to be the rules or the laws which are currently written to protect private property. And the system of notification alone was controversial, and there was significant opposition from the town people who were present at the meetings to having any kind of regulation at all. So the amendment to include the cubic yards of our threshold was made on the floor. I was in the minority. I thought that there should be no threshold unless we could prove safety below that threshold. I still actually feel that this is a dangerous threshold, because if you pulverize 10 cubic yards of rock containing lead, you could probably very successfully contaminate the entire town's drinking water. But anyway, I think we should get some comments from from other scientists and people who are more knowledgeable than I.
So I just want to make sure I understand, because again, I was not there and I don't pretend to have been there. I did read all of the notes going back from 2017. And so what I hear you saying, and it's consistent with my understanding, is the intent was to notify abutters. So for the protection, their protection of their private property as they saw fit with that information. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so I was the other board member who was there at the time. Having worked with public water supplies and the monitoring of them and the performance, and having worked on various projects, including when we were looking at the Whitney Farms development and trying to understand what kind of threats that might have posed to Holliston, which had its wells nearby. I have the opportunity to learn about the manganese and iron issues that Holliston faces on a regular basis, probably a different dynamic, leading to why they see iron and manganese in their wells, since they are overburdened wells, meaning not in the bedrock. And through that also learned about the hazards of manganese and the health impacts, and various issues around whether it's consumed or inhaled in mist, in showers, and so forth. So I would agree with Matt that a lot of the information that was presented about the hazards of manganese, we had already gone through. We wouldn't have a regulation like this if not for the hazards of manganese. That was the driver. There could be other hazards released, but that was certainly one that we're concerned about, again, due to two isolated instances in Sherborn of manganese showing up in water. And after trying to research, and we've been through this before, we tried to find out how might we regulate it, what is the scientific information that is out there that draws, I'll call it the straight line between bedrock disruption and contamination and predictability. We don't have much of a precautionary principle society here, so we look for evidence of it. And, you know, mining was referenced elsewhere, and mining is known to create all sorts of issues. The scale of mining is enormously different than what we're talking about. The presence of tailing ponds, that's the scrap from mining, sometimes mixed with the chemicals that are used in preliminary processing of the mined materials at the location of the mines, will have an impact, and a lot of devastating impacts from that. But that's not the scale that we're talking about here. Also, there really weren't any other documents about this issue that I could locate, and we didn't receive any. There was an interesting calculation done by Brian Moore about the potential, like what's for the type of granite that we have, what's the percentage range for manganese in that rock, and if it was all exposed and leached out, you know, what might that quantity look like? But again, that's speculative, and there aren't clear studies to point to that. And as we mentioned, we had spoken with various other government representatives and researchers who had looked at the issue a bit with the increase in bedrock disruption for development of more marginal lands that used to be considered marginal, and speculating on the connection between that bedrock disruption and impacts on groundwater or surface waters. And no one had come to a conclusion yet. And that's the kind of information that we need. I deal with regulations all the time. I've worked on regulatory updates with government authorities. That's the kind of data that gets used before setting something in a regulation. So we came up with this alternative approach, which was to let people know, again, there was some reference earlier about setting aside funds to deal with the repercussions that might result. Well, we're going to kick that over into the court arena and civil matters of harm. But what I think is the good thing that has come out of these discussions is that, as Mr. White mentioned, the Roses are going to take all the right measures to minimize exposure of large surface area of the disrupted bedrock to leaching, which would lead to that contamination. They're going to cover areas that are disrupted. They're going to remove the material the same day. And those measures are going to remove what would be the hazard or minimize it. Maybe not 100% remove it, but certainly minimize it. I also believe they offered up the sampling of their well, not as the be all and end all, but as sort of an attempt to try and identify if something was going awry in the process, and using what they had on their property to do that. And it is closer. That's not a guarantee of it being the first well to intercept something, but I think that's an excellent step. And so that's what I think we're wrestling with. And we came up with this regulation to just try to address this issue that concerns us. We are a concerned board about that, but this was the best that we could come up with. We can't find the evidence that we feel we would need to support more.
Except I don't
And we
agree.
welcome it the minute somebody finds it, but we did not see any of that in the materials we received.
Thanks, Daryl. Do any of the members of the board have other sort of comment or questions for the experts?
I don't have questions, but I can kind of give my only person who wasn't given a comment. So I was not on the board at the time that this was originally discussed, and so it's been really helpful to hear the circumstances that led to this, as well as the intent. Looking strictly at the what the regulations state, which is basically the tools we have in our toolbox. The regulation has been met. All the abutters have been notified. That has not come into question. And as Matt had stated, blasting is not going to happen. And butters within the proper radius have been notified. Looking at all of the materials that were submitted by both sides of this discussion, I found them to be incredibly interesting, dynamic, and complex, and it really showed that this is an issue that's worth this level of discussion. But looking at that, I still maintain that this is a speculative risk and it is not a foreseeable risk. At this point, Mr. Rosa has complied with our regulation as it is stated. Whether or not someone agrees with the regulation as it is stated, that is certainly for further discussion and research for us to continue to do, just as we are trying to continue to improve our regulations. So I do not see any need to revoke this permit at the time.
Any
I
questions?
think we should revoke it because but I think we should listen to what the experts have to say, because I think we need to learn from our mistakes and not keep making the same mistakes and wait till the town of Sherborn is a nice little cohort of people with contaminated property, contaminated drinking water, loss of property value, and, loss of health.
Thanks, Rebecca. Do you have specific questions for the experts beyond what was presented in their written documents?
I guess the question I would have is, but I think it would have been presented if it was found, the kind of scientific connection between bedrock disruption and some sort of predictability about what the outcomes are. So I said it could even be things like, does the size of the pieces that you create matter? Like, that would be useful. Rather than pulverizing rock, is creating cubic yard chunks. I would assume that would greatly reduce the exposed surface area. Are there techniques for doing that? Is that a different approach? We can't implement that now, but that is the kind of information that could be useful for us in the future.
To the experts before we make our decision?
Rebecca,
or I'm just asking you, this is a procedural question. Are we going to listen to what the experts have to say, or are we just going to repeat the vote from last time?
So I think what I asked Rebecca was, we all have received written documentation from the experts, which we all reviewed prior to this. the question I had for you before was whether you have specific questions to clarify any of that, or any specific questions for the experts beyond what was presented in their written statements.
Yes, because we're not looking for brand new information, clarifications. Again, I did just ask something that goes a little bit into beyond that. Again, I think it would have been submitted if it had been found, but I'd be curious to hear. Or if they found something that they didn't think matched.
Because I think there is new information with the homeowner did rock analysis of rock from her property. That's new information. But not only does it have manganese, but it also has lead, which is regulated by the EPA. How do we know that this is not? Why are we not considering this new information?
Rebecca,
I think we are considering everything that was presented to us.
I also believe there was clarification. At least it made it difficult for me that is a decertified lab.
Yes, and we did know about the composition because it's in USGS maps too that identify the type of granite that we have. I agree site specific is interesting, and I also agree with Julie that it's a lab that is decertified because it is not following standard drinking water quality testing requirements of Mass DEP.
So I think at this point, I'd like to ask if each of the representatives for the appellant and the homeowner have any sort of response or comment, and I think feel free to refer to your experts. I want to clarify, I think we're not planning to take sort of open comment from everyone in this hearing. I think really it's questions for the representatives and if the board has questions for the experts. So I think Mr. Seligson, do you have any response to the discussion thus far?
Well, yes, thank you. I do understand that the board feels that this strict reading of the bedrock disruption provision somehow sort of handcuffs you in terms of what you can do as a board. But it sort of defeats the purpose of the existence of the board if there is evidence that perhaps is disputed by evidence on the other side of this issue, that the board somehow cannot act as the Board of Health in what its overriding goal here is to protect the community. And so, I think you can extrapolate that there is a requirement that whatever you do that requires a permit from the Board of Health should make sure that the Board of Health is satisfied that activity that is going to be permitted is not going to be injurious to the community. And we have submitted and presented experts here tonight that can gladly tell you that it's not speculation, it's foreseeable, and it's reasonable to conclude that there is a problem with what is being proposed. I believe Dr. Brooks wanted to say something, and I don't know if you would allow him to say something, but I believe he wanted to respond to one of the comments that was made.
That'd be fine if you want to defer to him to make a comment.
Dr. Brooks, if you're available.
Yes, if you don't mind. Thank you so much for letting me come before you. I really appreciate it. I have known Rebecca for a number of years, and I'm doing this more as a friend. I have a company called Clifton Waterworks, and I'm a Class 4 engineer in Northern Virginia, which means I can take care of any town of 5,000 people or less and their water systems. And in Clifton, there are 4 restaurants and a daycare center. Everybody's on a well. It's one of the last towns in all of Northern Virginia that are on wells. And every week I have to go and measure all these chemicals that you're talking about. Now, this whole unaccredited situation, that just heard that for the first time 2 minutes ago. So from my report, I'm looking at, 5 ppm lead, thousands of iron, and 130 manganese, which are all significantly high. And then I have a TCLP, which is Toxic Characteristic Leaching Potential Report, which tells me the way they are right now, they aren't going anywhere. They're literally locked
in that bedrock. So if you bust that up, then the question becomes, which way is the water flow? If it flows back towards the houses they're building, they're going to have issues. If it goes the other way towards the abutters, they're going to have issues. So what I was actually asking or proposing, and I know the builder rebutted, is like, you need to have monitoring wells along those edges. And what they really do is they tell you whether or not lead, manganese, or iron are going the wrong way. And if they are, then the contractor needs to put systems in those homes to protect them. Not wait till they find out in their home they can't drink their water. That's how I wanted to talk about.
All right, thank you. Mr. Seligson, did you have anything else to add, or should we move on to Mr. White?
I mean, I think, you know, the reports I would submit speak for themselves and are, you know, more than speculative. I think they have confirming information in them. I believe Professor Timothy Downs would like to say something before we go to Mr. White, if that's possible, Professor Downs.
I thought we were just doing rebuttal statements without bringing in, I thought the reports spoke for themselves.
I think this is in rebuttal.
No, I thought you and I each had an opportunity to speak for a few minutes.
I defer to the board.
But let's let Mr. White respond right now, and then I think the board will decide if we want to go back and restate what's been presented.
Thank you.
Thank you. As I stated before, and as you properly brought out, Mr. Rosa and his team did everything that was required of them under Section 10, the bedrock destruction regulation. They applied for the permit. They notified all the owners. They said there was no blasting involved. And then the regulation says a permit shall not be issued until there is acceptable completion of the above requirements and satisfactory review of the blasting agent's composition. Since there's no blasting involved, then the only issue was there acceptable completion of the requirements? There was. At the June 7th hearing, 7 neighbors spoke. At the June 21st hearing, 8 neighbors spoke. As you've indicated, we're talking about potentials, non-speculative results, non-speculative occurrences. If we were, that'd be one thing, but everything is speculation, everything is hypothetical. Mr. Rosa deserves the opportunity to construct his property, and he's doing it as safely as he possibly can. I think the appeal ought to be denied. I think you're well aware of the existence of manganese. You're well aware of its existence in rock. It exists everywhere. And I appreciate my brother's provision of all these experts, but the bottom line is you have to make decisions based on what the regulations say. I wouldn't disagree that it wouldn't be a bad idea in the future to modify those regulations, put some more specifics into them, but as they exist right now, you should be allowed to move forward and operate on the permit that you issued 2 months ago. He's already held up for these past 2 months, and he shouldn't be prevented from moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks. So I know we have a couple of the other experts with their hands up. I'd like to get a sense of the board. What I don't want to get into is sort of a rehashing of what's already been presented in the written reports. I think if there's something new that the experts want to add that they feel like was not conveyed or was misconstrued, I'd be fine hearing that. But I don't know that I want to sort of just have a verbal report of what was presented written. Does that seem reasonable to other members of the board?
I agree with that.
Yes.
So having said that, I know Mark Dershowitz, you have been one of the experts that presented. I know your hand's been up for a while. Do you have something to add beyond or what was written or any response to what's been said?
Yes, I do. In our society, it is customary, whether we're talking about a drug or a product or a process, to demonstrate that it's safe before it is available to the masses. And the same philosophy must apply here. There's no evidence that the process is safe, and much anecdotal concern that it is not. And the Board of Health should not play Russian roulette with the town's groundwater, which is what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you. Tim Down, I believe your hand is also up.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to contribute. So I disagree that we're just talking about hypotheticals. It's a fact that there's manganese in the bedrock. It's actually a fact based on the Massachusetts water quality data that Sherborn actually has above average exceedances of the lifetime health advisory levels in the monitoring data that we looked at. And I'm a co-author on this Friedman et al. 2023 paper that has been used as part of the body of evidence here. So I also disagree that we're being speculative. That amount of bedrock that will be disrupted, and let's be clear, it's disruption, it means it's being pulverized, which means that the manganese it contains becomes bioavailable, becomes able to be mobilized by rainwater, and the abutting properties are down gradient and of sufficient proximity that there is potential risk. So this is not hypothetical, it's not speculative. These are not unforeseeable risks, they are foreseeable risks and they should be taken seriously. Thank you.
I see iPhone Scott has his hand up. Is that Scott Horsley, one of the other experts?
It is. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I didn't know my last name was not up yet. And I'll be very brief. I will not talk about my comments on the septic system compliance, which I think needs to be taken up at a later time. But the one thing I would add to this discussion is that there's an important linkage, in my opinion, between the compliance with notifying abutters and other regulatory compliance issues that I think is very related, and that is depth to groundwater underneath the foundation of the property. I pointed this out in my letter, but I want to make the connection between your discussion. Your regulations require 2-foot separation. It's been, everybody's agreed in the past that the high groundwater tracks the bedrock surface. And that, I've seen this in many other sites, that is absolutely true. However, in the final submittal by the applicant's engineer, they're making an exception and saying, well, that's true generally, but not in the case of the house, that the bedrock does not, excuse me, the groundwater does not track the bedrock elevation. I think this is what I would call cherry picking data. And I think that according to their submittals, the groundwater depth to 2 feet does not be met, and that increases or provides a vulnerability for this contamination of groundwater via the pulverizing of the bedrock. So I think I also want to point out there's a linkage here, I think, between the notification regulation, and I understand if you look at that by itself and you close your eyes to every other related subject, then maybe they've complied, but they do not comply with the depth of groundwater. I know the applicant's going to argue against that, but I sincerely believe if you look at all of the submittals, groundwater does track on top of the bedrock during estimated seasonal high water. I did point this out in my letter. They're essentially asserting that the groundwater level is essentially flat underneath the house, despite the fact that the bedrock has a very clear slope to it. And so I think this is an important connection between the 2 points that does increase the vulnerability and should be taken into account in your decision. Thank you.
Thank you. The last hand I see up is from Artist Flavel. I don't recall that being one of the experts, but maybe I'm mistaken.
He did submit material. I don't know if, or a communication she had.
Oh, yes. Okay. Yes,
town
you're
was
right. That's my mistake. Go ahead. You're on mute.
I'll see if I can unmute you. I don't think I can.
Oh.
Hi, I'm sorry.
There you go. Thank you.
Yeah, no.
And again, my apologies for missing your name.
No, that's, you did it, you did great. I just had a very quick thing to say, and it was just correcting the state that my water was in after the building behind me. And I just wanted to say that 7 months later, the point that is the acceptable rate for the state is 0.05. My water was at 5.58 7 months later. And that's all. I just wanted to correct what had been said before, because it was just substantially more than what was said before, actually.
Thank you.
Mhm.
All right, and I now see a hand up from Brian Moore, who is one more expert, and I think that'll be our last comment before we go back to discussion among the board.
Thank you, Matt and Brian Moore. I've met many people on the board here before. Thank you for hearing me tonight. I just wanted to add that I think we just heard what the board was looking for, which is a direct line of evidence that such a condition that we are predicting is going to occur has already occurred from this very rock right down the street. And I think the board should consider their willingness to appeal this permit based on the fact that there's already been a demonstrated correlation between rock disruption and increases in manganese in this very neighborhood. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Brian. So I think at this point, I'd like to see if there's any additional comment or response to that from the board, and then I'd like to propose a vote.
I think I'd like to mention that I agree that it's not completely speculative, but the magnitude and the specifics of how the bedrock is disrupted and managed, and then what results from that is something that we don't have a firm grasp on. Our limited understanding of what went on at the other location in town, we don't have great insight into that because the developer wasn't inclined to share that sort of information with the town, especially after this happened. But observations from neighbors or passersby or what have you is that all the material was left on the property to use as fill, which is not the most secure footing if you've looked at soil mechanics for this kind of application. But so that is the piece that we're missing. It's obviously we've drawn a connection to it on the board, but it's all the details about what will lead to what. And that's what we have not found documentation on or studies of.
All right, thanks, Rebecca.
My final comment is that I think that it would be irresponsible of us to not take a moment to put some protections for the homeowners and the abutters, and possibly not even abutters, but people whose drinking water will be affected by such significant ledge pulverization and destruction. Not only do private property owners have a right to do whatever they like with their private property, but every person deserves to have safe and clean drinking water. And the only reason we're having this conversation tonight is because private wells are not protected by statute. And we, the Board of Health, have to take the initiative to take measures and precautions that will actually protect in a proactive manner drinking water. We have enough information. We're all intelligent, thoughtful people, and we know that this is unfair to put the abutters at risk in this way when we have evidence of things that have happened in the past. We should have acted 3.5 years ago, immediately when we learned about that first example. And now there have been more. I don't think that entire family has been exposed to neurotoxic manganese and could potentially have progressive neurologic disease in their lifetime. We can't fix that. What do we do when lead and manganese at neurotoxic levels get into the water? We cannot correct it once it happens. If we had a solution or a treatment, then okay, fine, we can say, go for it, Mr. Rosa, do whatever you want. And then you pay for these guys to have their treatment, but we don't have treatment to offer people. And we know enough in advance that I think it isn't fair. And it's potentially going to affect many people who are not just nearby. And I think we as a Board of Health should be actually thinking about public health and think and be smart and protect our natural resources in Sherborn.
Thanks, Rebecca. Julie? Anything you'd like to add?
I didn't have anything to add to what Rebecca said.
Okay. All right. So I think, I don't need to restate what I've said before. I think that, we all acknowledge that there's potential for risk here, and that's why this regulation happened. I think at the same time, in my mind, the applicant has fulfilled the regulation, and that while we acknowledge the potential for risk, we cannot prove a certainty of risk, and therefore the risk is speculative. And so based on that, I would move that we deny the appeal, thereby allowing the bedrock disruption permit to stand.
Matt, before we vote, at what point in the procedure would we have the opportunity to request some provisions be required of the developer? Or is this, in your view, the only time we would consider doing that?
I think that if you wanted to, I think that we would have to probably, to make requirements, we would have to first uphold the permit. I think if we choose to vote to deny the appeal and uphold the permit, you could make a motion to that effect to make other requirements. I think there may be some discussion among the board about whether that's possible, but I think there's no point in providing requirements unless the permit goes forward. Does that make sense?
Yes, I would, because I would move that if tonight's permit appeal is not, if the board votes to allow them to proceed with the building permit, I would propose that we require provisions of precautionary measures to be taken and become the responsibility of the developer. As a Board of Health, we could request that of them.
So I think we have already requested some provisions. I think if the question is, are we going to require something, then that would be a separate motion. But I think my preference would still be, let's do step one. And then if the permit is upheld, then you're free to make a motion on what specific requirements you'd like. Does that sound reasonable, Rebecca?
Okay, because I'm concerned that if we don't attach, for example, the requirement for monitoring wells on the property lines of abutters to attach to the permit, I'm not sure there's any way to enforce it. And those would need to be put in place before activities take place.
I do have a question about process.
Sure.
We discussed provisions and whether to make them when we first voted on the permit. So I'm not sure if this is an appeal, yay or nay on what we already approved versus reopening that discussion. I don't have an answer for that. That's a process question.
I mean, I think what we're voting on is the appeal to sort of deny the appeal or uphold the appeal.
Yes. Now, I'm just saying about the discussion about provisions. We did do that.
We did.
When we originally voted on the permit.
And I would say that I will just go ahead and say that I would not be, if we do deny the appeal and the permit is therefore upheld, I would not be inclined to revisit that because I think we discussed it before, and I think we had an extensive discussion about what we could and couldn't do. And I think that the homeowners come back with proposed measures that I think are reasonable and above and beyond what is strictly required. So I think with that said, I'd like to go ahead and vote on the appeal. And then Rebecca, I'm happy to entertain a motion after that. So I would, just to restate it, I would move that so noting that all of the requirements of the regulation have been met and that nothing presented tonight argues otherwise, that we deny the appeal and that the permit for bedrock disruption stands.
So moved.
Seconded.
And so just to be clear here, and I vote leaves the permit in place, a nay vote would revoke the permit. Any
Okay,
further
I do
discussion?
have just
Yep.
another, yes, little comment. I spent my entire career working on preventing pollution in a wide variety of ways around the globe. And so I fully appreciate what the concerns are for this and have searched for years to find the information that I think would be defensible in court should this have been challenged in court about us not permitting the bedrock disruption. And that's what I have not been able to find. And I don't want us to become the case that proves the rule. I hope that doesn't happen. And again, I think part of avoiding that happening is to have those good management practices that Mr. White and Mr. Rosa have expressed willingness to implement in the carrying out of this. So, thank you.
Any further discussion? Hearing none. So Matt Beavers votes aye to deny the appeal.
Julie Dreyfus,
Can
aye.
you please repeat the statement?
The motion?
Yes.
So the motion is to deny the appeal and uphold the issuance of the bedrock disruption permit. So that was, I voted aye, and then Julia didn't hear you.
Julie Dreyfus, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, nay.
Carol Beardsley, aye.
Right, and then Rebecca, I did say I would afford you the opportunity to make a motion about further requirements if you'd like to.
I move that we require with the building permit a monitoring wells to be placed around the perimeter of the work and the property at the butters property lines, as well as some kind of a fund for remediation if anything happens, because it's going to be, you know, next year or after a rainy spring.
So my understanding is that your motion is to require the placement of monitoring wells and establishment of a fund.
Yes.
Okay, I don't believe we have a mechanism or an authority to do that. I don't know if others have comments.
I think placing monitoring wells around, on the one hand, just as in we don't know where the bedrock fractures run, there's no guarantee without placing those wells immediately adjacent to one another all around the perimeter and getting to all the right depths and how you're sampling and what depth you're sampling from, that would necessarily be effective, or it would be almost impossible to implement. So I'm having a hard time, and we don't have any details on what kind of fund, how large, immediate,
Well, we
built
could
up over
create
time.
something. I mean, we could make it up. We're trying to protect drinking water and have a way for the poor down gradient homeowners to have some assistance if we allow irresponsible projects to take place in town.
All right, so we have a motion to add this requirement. Do we have a second for the motion?
For the town collection.
I'm sorry, who is speaking?
I think it was accidental.
Okay.
Someone muted there.
All right, so we have a motion to add additional requirements for monitoring wells in a fund. Do we have a second for that motion? Hearing no second, that motion fails. And so with that, I think we close this appeal hearing. Ellen, do we need to vote to close the hearing, or can I just close it?
I think you should vote to close it since you voted to open it.
Open it, sounds good. All right, so I move that we close the appeal hearing for the bedrock disruption permit for 39 Wildwood.
So moved.
So there are no possibilities of anyone commenting on this?
No, we're not, we've heard from the experts, we've heard from things, we voted, we're not taking additional comment at this time.
So we are waiting for someone to get.
I'm sorry, but the board is in the
Is
middle of a vote. We can't have additional comment at this time.
No, but your
Opportunity for all the representatives to speak and for the experts to speak, and we currently have a vote on the table.
y'all haven't even considered.
It's an open meeting. I think that
It's
that
Rebecca, it
members
is an
of the
open meeting, which
community
means
should
people,
be
Rebecca,
allowed to comment.
Rebecca, it's an open meeting, which means everyone is able to listen to the meeting. It does not require us to have public comment. We have heard from representatives from both sides. We've heard from the experts. We've had a vote. I've now made a motion to close the appeal. Do I have a second for that motion?
Second.
Any
How
further
much
discussion?
ability to stand.
Mr. Sir, I don't know who's speaking, but we are in the middle of a vote. We are in the middle of a vote by the board.
And I'll also note that the guidance for the appeal hearing is that information was submitted by a certain time so it could be reviewed. So the board had time to review it in advance and carefully go over it. And so taking comments that are outside of that, I don't think is part of it. Unfortunately, on the process level.
Thank you for hiding behind the regulation.
I'm sorry, but we are on the middle of a vote by the board. And if you continue to interrupt, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. So there's been a motion to close the meeting. Is there a second to close the meeting, to close the, not the meeting, to close the appeal?
Second.
Yes, Julie had seconded earlier, so.
Okay, I think we've had discussion. So Matt Beavers, aye.
Julie Dreyfus, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, nay. Democracy includes public comment.
Apparently not here.
I would please ask the public to refrain from comment because there is not an open public comment period. We're in the middle of a vote by the board. We're waiting for Chairperson Beardsley's vote.
Daryl Beardsley, aye. And there was extensive public comment at the earlier hearings.
All right, thank you. The appeal is now closed. All right. We have a number of other items of business. Since many people are here, why don't we go with agent's business on 39 Wildwood Drive?
Okay. The plan for 39 Wildwood Drive, and it has been through a few revisions. The most recent revision is August 15th, 2023. And I am recommending approval of that plan, both for septic system and well, conditional to a deed recording for the garbage grinder.
All right, so this is the version of the plan.
Yes, it's 3 sheets.
I just can't see the date because everyone's picture was in front of it.
You got to go to the next column from the right side of the plan, the address plate.
There we go. I got the date. Okay, that's fine. So this is the third revision. Yes, there we go. Okay.
And actually, Matt, there's sheet number 1 has a revision of 8/15/23. I wish I could point to you, but if you look at where it says Creative Lanham, you go to the left of that, and you'll see a little block down to the bottom of the sheet. That's the most recent revision.
Okay.
Okay, that's August 15th, 2023.
Okay, I just want to make sure I'm showing the right thing.
That's fine.
Okay.
And on sheet 3 of 3, that's where the change was made for this plan. We did ask that they show the drainage structure, and it's shown on the profile to the mid left, well, closer to right there. Yep, that's it.
All right. Yes, and that's in. I'll just try to zoom in on that a little bit. I apologize. I'm losing my voice a little bit.
Yep. You'll see it shows it's dotted, but it shows the that's good that
that's as much as I can zoom. So this you're noting the foundation drain here, which is what we were asking for, which is shown in the blue dashed line.
Yep, correct.
All right. Questions from the board on this?
So Mark, we've had this sort of analysis done before. Is this consistent with the last time?
Yes, we had something of the same process on Green Lane.
And I think part of what Scott was talking about, which I think is what this board has always done, is assume that groundwater begins at bedrock. And so if you take away some bedrock, it still begins at bedrock.
That's a perfect point. That's how the board handled it last time we dealt with this.
Right. And so then what we ended up doing was looking at, since our concern is that moisture not build up inside the shell of the house in a way that would be harmful to the occupants over time from mold and whatever else. And so drainage away from the house under these circumstances became the method, right, to go after.
Correct.
And so are you satisfied with the plans that they've incorporated?
Yes, I am, based on the foundation drainage that they show on this profile and also on the other sheet.
Mm-hmm. And then the other, I think the other feature in the prior instance was that one side of the foundation might have been built into bedrock, but that the other side was open to grade, and furthermore, it was a slope downward away. So that would foster water moving past and away from the house. Is that the same here? Because I can see it indicates that on the diagram, but I don't know how far that extends beyond the house.
Sheet 2 of 3, if you want to go to sheet 2 of 3.
Yeah, I believe it does show where it daylights here, correct?
Logic, yes, the middle section there, correct, right there. Yep.
So this is the daylight of the foundation drain.
Right there, yes, and there's a note to that effect as well.
And there's the drain documented surrounding the entire foundation, which is what we had also asked for before.
Okay.
Any other questions on this?
Okay. I guess I do have one more question. So during the bedrock disruption activities, which are also going to be part of developing the site for all of this, are there arrangements with the engineer and or the applicant for you to visit just to check on how things are going?
The board stipulated that in the prior discussions. If the board so wishes, the applicant could put this all in writing about the visits and so forth during the actual ledge disruption. There are procedures for it to not be pulverized, for it to be taken out in chunks, removed immediately or covered. So there are provisions, and that was a vote of the board in the past, but it's part of this. I consider it as part of this plan approval.
Okay, good.
And they do need to drill the well and prove potability before they even get to the point of doing the foundation, as required in the building permit, unless they were to get foundation only permit. But I would bring that to the board's attention prior to recommending approval, since this is the whole foundation is part of the discussion of ledge disruption.
So to be clear, what we're voting on here is potential approval of this plan. They would then still be required to drill the well prior to issuance of a building permit. Or they'd have to request a foundation only, and then that would come before us, correct?
That is correct. And it would be brought to our attention as a building permit.
Yeah. Okay.
And they can't get a building permit until they prove potability of the water. So they have to drill the well and then prove quantity and quality. then they can apply for the actual building application that would match the septic plan.
Okay. All right. Other questions or comments?
No.
Do I have a motion to approve the septic plan as presented? Contingent on a garbage grinder prohibition deed recording, right? Mark, you said that?
Correct.
And pre-construction conference, is that?
Yeah,
applicable
that's
here?
part of it all too. I mean, and following all the procedures that are required that are very common and part of the approval process when we approve installers permits. So the installer knows they need to do a pre-construction conference with the engineer.
Okay, so we don't need more here. All right. Yes, so moved.
Seconded.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, Matt Beavers, aye.
Julie Dreyfus, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Daryl Beardsley, aye.
All right, great. Moving on. Let's see, I'm gonna go back. Let's see, what else do we have to discuss? There's some chairs business. One being the ZB, sorry.
Oh, I was gonna say maybe the wells, because I believe there's
Oh, yeah.
several people here for the Laurel Fields.
No, that makes sense. So we'll finish up agent's business. So discussion of the irrigation wells at the Laurel Farm Recreation Area. So 2 wells, irrigation well A, well B, for discussion, plus a request for fee waiver. Mark, do you want to orient us to this?
Sure. The request is for 2 irrigation wells at Laurel Fields. They're going to be going towards the back of the property. If you were on the property, there are high tension wires for electricity, and they're to the right of that a little bit, and towards the back a little bit to the right. They're 292.9 feet apart, the 2 wells that they're wishing to drill. The purpose of the wells are for irrigating the fields. The plan I think you might have the most recent plan if you want to bring it up.
I didn't see it here.
I didn't see it either.
I didn't
Okay.
see it in the documents.
If it's not there, that's fine. I thought it was uploaded, but it's a plan stamped by the engineer at GLM as well as their surveyor, but the engineer is the one that usually will certify, and he did. Rob Truax from GLM certified that there are no septic systems or wells located within 200 feet of the proposed wells, and that they're labeled as proposed well A and proposed well B. I did tour the property at the beginning of this week, as well as the surrounding abutters. The abutters are on Rockwood and Rockwood Street, and the abutter is an apple orchard. And then after the apple orchard, then you have the houses on the other side of Rockwood Street. And I found the plan to be accurate. There were some distances they had to change on the plan, but that was shown accurately. It just, they had the wrong numbers and they did correct it. There it is.
Thanks, Joe.
Yeah. And thank you too. I didn't know it wasn't uploaded on the agenda. So wells are in the backside, exactly right there. And the abutting property is the apple orchards in the town of Sherborn. And the certification statements to the middle left side, not the middle, the left side of the plan at the middle section, right there. The one thing that will be a challenge, because when I walked the property, I said to myself, they're going to need electricity, and the electricity on the property is only at the beginning of the entrance to the Laurel Fields. So there will be a need to put some type of power towards the wells to make sure the pumps have power. I don't know if indeed they have worked that out yet, but that is the one thing I kind of observed when I was out there, is that there will be a need to bring in power lines to the point of the wells, and I'm not for sure if they're going to directly feed the electricity to the wells, or if they're going to have like a well shed for any of the needed equipment. That I'm not for sure. That's not shown anywhere, but that would be a requirement that the electrical inspector would probably be involved with reviewing. I don't know if anyone's on the meeting right now that might be able to answer that, but that's the one thing I did notice. And again, it's going to be needed. They're going to need electricity to power the wells.
So I think, sorry.
This is Jeff Bowman speaking. I'm the irrigation consultant for the town for the project. So I'm sort of like managing the process. If I may just speak to the electrical question. We really don't want to put the cart before the horse here. We don't know if we're going to find any water. So prior to having fully developed engineering plans, we want to know what we're going to end up with for our water supply, which will drive the horsepower, the electrical disconnect size, and so on and so forth. So at this point, we're sort of waiting on approval to drill the wells. Then once we establish a yield, then we can move forward with site programming and get into more engineering detail.
And I would just ask that you follow up with a plan on that actual specification. But indeed, most wells that are drilled and are drilled with pumped out with generators during the beginning process, but the final process of where you're planning to put the power grid, the power lines and so forth, and if you're going to have a well shed with equipment in it, would be important to have that plan before you go ahead and do that.
Absolutely.
So the discussion we
Also,
have, go ahead, Gerald.
I was going to say the other thing that when we've discussed irrigation wells, this is a little bit different because of the nature of the project. It's focused on that. We've dealt with residences in the past, and we do have our no second well policy and no irrigation well policy. So one, I'd like to hear, as part of our process, we have the applicants describe what the need is for irrigation and just present that for the board and for anyone here listening to understand that.
Yeah,
it's just part of our process that we have required in other cases.
Sure. So if I may, again, this is Jeff Bowman with Irrigation Consulting. The need for irrigation doesn't exist all the time, and we've had a very wet summer of 2023. Of course, when you compare that to what happened in 2022, there was a fairly significant irrigation demand on these athletic fields. What we're trying to deliver here is during times of insufficient rainfall, when there is a deficit, when the soils start to dry down, we want to provide a safe and playable surface for the residents and the field users. So any system that we're designing here is going to have the ability to respond to the climate. So as it rains, as the soil pore spaces start to fill up with water, we don't want to add any irrigation. We don't want to be having any irrigation scheduled until we actually have a moisture deficit in the soil where the turf grass would benefit by having a supplemental water application. So that's kind of like the intent and the spirit of the design. The actual breadth of the irrigation system is going to be driven by how much water we actually discover in the wells, and also our budgets. And we are budget limited here, and we are investing more money than we had initially hoped to on the well, sort of our current discovery process on the site and our bid set that's going out to well drillers. So once we drill the well, we've spent a certain amount of money there, then we can look at what were the results, and then how much irrigation are we actually able to implement underneath our budget cap. So from a demand standpoint, average daily demand in times of insufficient rain, we're talking July, August, when it hasn't rained for a week, the daily demands are going to range between 7,000 gallons a day and 20,000 gallons a day, depending on, again, the fruits of our efforts here with well development. We'd like to, in an ideal world, irrigate 2 fields, but we may not be able to do so. So the higher end of that value that I just gave you, the 20,000 gallons per day average, that would be 2 irrigated fields. But we may only end up with 1, which would be the lower end.
Okay, so I'll mention a few things since I was involved with projects years ago about organically managed turf fields in towns. It was a state-funded project. Several towns were involved. And really, we were learning from Marblehead on what they were doing. In the course of that, there are a few things. One, I understand irrigation needs when you're trying to establish grass, being very important, and that periodically, as fields get damaged, you will need to reestablish grass in some cases. But that the goal, at least as described to me back then by people who were managing the fields for years, in Marblehead in particular, is to promote deep root growth. So you would not do daily watering, one. So that's one issue, is management being considered of the irrigation waters from a minimization perspective, because that's ultimately the Board of Health's concern. Because when it is low rainfall, and certainly when it's a drought condition, we really don't want to be diverting drinking water supplies to irrigation. So that's going to be the tricky balance. Probably when you might most want to water is when we'd least like to see the watering taking place. So I realize that you haven't been able to make a full plan yet, and that maybe this would be step 2 after you understand what water is there. And also, well, we need to talk about pump tests with these, because just because you can pull the water out from those wells, we need to understand how that is affecting the water supply in that area, and any wells that might be hydraulically connected to whatever those wells are connected to. So those will be things that until you drill, you won't have those answers. And you might not know your management plan yet, but those are the kinds of questions we're going to ask. I envision this, although this is a board decision, I envision this as a 2-step process. First is, if we agree that the need is there for the wells, permit the wells with the condition that we get to review the irrigation management plan later.
I like that, Daryl. I think a lot of my questions here really are around process. I think one other comment to make just before I go into that is, as people probably recall, there was extensive discussion about these being converted to artificial turf fields a year or 2 ago. And I think the board had a lot of discussion around that and some concerns about sort of just being unable to predict the impact of that. And so I think, it's also in the board's interest to be able to promote sort of activity and recreation for people in the town. And so that this would be sort of being able to support these fields would be in keeping with that. And so I think, I would say in principle, I sort of support the idea of sort of a minimal irrigation approach to do this, because I do think we need to support these fields in some way. But I think I would want to see, if we are approving the wells, I would want to make sure there was a way for us to sort of understand what the impact was, since we don't have a lot of details here, and because this isn't a typical well that we see come before us. But I think if you feel, and I think I feel, a condition that we get to then review the management plan later may be sufficient, that might be a good way to go.
And then the other key thing I think is, since when larger drawing wells have gone in the past, there's been monitoring performed on surrounding properties. And so we would need to determine that as well. Like, where are they going to be placed? How long is the pump test going to be? 4 hours is not close to what the pump tests have been before. So looks like Matt from Geosphere, is that your role on this? Part of your role on this project?
Yeah, hi, I'm Matt from Geosphere. I know Jeff fairly well at this point, and that would be the area that we would chime in here on. This would be conducting the hydrogeological evaluation of the pumping of these wells. You're correct to say that the 4-hour pumping test required of the Board of Health for preliminary yield evaluation, as well as water quality sampling, that would be a too short a period of time to really evaluate potential impacts to surrounding wells. So if it became sort of a requirement by the Board of Health to do some longer term evaluation, that would be the role that Geosphere would play, would be assisting in that determination.
And what have you used for length of time in other cases?
For Geospheres, when we evaluate wells long-term, we're looking more from the public water supply well side of things. Massachusetts DEP has some requirements for long-term testing that go anywhere from 7 days to 15 days, or on a case-by-case basis, could be somewhere in between or possibly a little longer. As far as irrigation wells, I would have to determine if there are any regulations that either Mass DEP has as a point of reference, or something that the town Board of Health would require of us to do it. But like I said, 4 hours is too short. We'd be probably talking reasonably a couple of days to determine immediate close by impacts, and then possibly a little longer depending on how far out you wanted to reach to see where impacts would be. In a bedrock system, it's difficult to really accurately predict where you might see impacts versus where you wouldn't, because of how the fractured bedrock structure is. You know, we've seen wells 8 feet apart from each other that have no impact on each other, and then we've seen wells that are a couple miles apart that do have impacts. So it's difficult to say. We'd have to evaluate that.
Is there any opportunity to look at impacts on the surface waters, the wetlands nearby, to give some sort of insight?
In long-term pumping tests that we've done in the past, we will monitor overburden wells. We will monitor surface waters, whether it be wetlands or rivers and streams, vernal pools, you know, anything that's in the area, because there could be connections that you just can't see. So we just always err on the side of caution and monitor it to prove either positive or negative on any impacts. So.
And I mean, in looking at the map, you know, there aren't a lot of residences close by, as would be on, you know, some of the other projects that we've had in town that are just, it's a cluster of homes around, and therefore a cluster of wells closer by. So these distances are going to be a little bigger, which is going to make it complicated. So I guess that would be hard maybe to decide right now.
It's I will say that in all conversations like this that we do have when we determine where to monitor, sometimes we are limited by the number of wells, and we have to take the information that we have available as best we can and use it. You know, if there's a limited number of wells in the general vicinity of Laurel Fields, then we will monitor what is feasible. And then also from the standpoint, if there's a limited number of wells, it also sort of then is a limited number of impacts as well. I mean, if there's not a well there, then there's not a well to be impacted. So we take and work the best we can with what we have available to us.
Okay, so right, as I look at this map, I mean, there are, and not all people will be willing to have their wells monitored. So
that's correct. Yep.
That's another issue. And there are some monitoring wells to the right of this property in that locus map at the Sassaman Trace. And I don't know if there are any monitoring wells around the landfill, the town landfill. They might be some options just to look at merely level changes. And then your point is appreciated about less wells to impact, perhaps, except given that the whole water resource is an interconnected network and what have you. And I think the difference for me that I'm not sure how we quantify or if it has been quantified is, you know, right now people take water from the ground, they use it in their home and they discharge it to the septic system and it goes back into the ground. And there's not a lot of evaporative loss with that, but I think there is a lot of evaporative loss with irrigation, unless there are methods to do it where there isn't that. So I don't know if there's any percentages that go along for understanding what's sort of a more permanent removal from the groundwater resources.
So if I may, Jeff Bowman here, the goal would be 100% of the water would not be returned to the groundwater. Because if you are, if that's occurring, you're over irrigating. You are saturating the macropore spaces in the soil and you're starving the lawn, the grass. So we want to always be irrigating where there's tension in the soil. In other words, the macro spaces of the soil are always left open for air. You don't ever want to be irrigating to induce drainage unless you're trying to leach accumulated minerals out of the soil profile. So 100% of the water that we're using for irrigation would be retained in the root zone of the plants for subsequent use by the plant for evapotranspiration.
Okay. And the root zone goes how deep, roughly?
Well, it depends on how we irrigate. You suggested earlier about daily irrigation results in grass getting lazy and not wanting to go find the water. So we certainly would not be recommending a daily irrigation interval. We'd want to be irrigating every 2 to 3 days in the absence of rainfall to really have the grass go deeper to try to find the water. The deeper the root zone of the grass, the less susceptible it is to short-term drought. It can bridge the gaps between rain events if they have deeper roots. So we're hoping to have management practices established to try to get the roots as deep as feasible. The soils out there are fairly heavy. So we're working through that. I mean, this will be described in the irrigation management plan, but the take-home points here is irrigation will not be every day, and we do not want to have any irrigation schedule resulting in drainage to the groundwater.
So I think to just sort of build off the comment that this will all be described in the future and acknowledging the hour, I think we should sort of focus on sort of what steps we should take now, and then what materials that we'll be able to sort of review in more detail at a future date. And so it sounds like sort of there's this multi-step process. One is going to be, can we approve these wells? And then once they've been drilled and found to be successful, it sounds like we're going to need a longer discussion and review of the plans going forward. Is that a fair characterization?
I think so, yeah.
And so I guess, Mark, what do you need from us tonight?
For us is to approve the well plan, which is part of the well permit for these 2 irrigation wells. And as the discussion led on, I would suggest that the board add a condition to that this approval is conditional to the Board of Health's review of the irrigation plan for final approval.
Do we feel comfortable with that sort of being enough before use? Because we're going to, we approve the well's going to be drilled. And then we basically will have a check on use to ensure that we review the plan.
That's a good point. So within that condition, it should state that it's prior to use, that the Board of Health review the irrigation management plan.
Okay.
And where do we want to build in the pump test? and monitoring criteria.
Maybe within that condition, Daryl, when the board has to review the irrigation management plan, to include that with that.
Well, I think they're going to want to do the pump test though, right after they put in the wells.
Oh, yes, I'm
And
sorry.
before they have, that's what's going to give them the information about what they could do for irrigation.
Right, so I guess the wording was wrong. I should have said prior to use of the wells for irrigation purposes, that the board review the irrigation management plan
Yeah.
prior. But obviously, they're going to have to pump those wells to determine the quality and the quantity.
And so I guess the question for Daryl is, how do we build in a condition that we need to approve what the pump plan is?
Right, we don't have this too often, and the other ones have been associated with 40Bs, which is a whole other process. So this one, we're charting new territory here on how to structure this. Because Mark, I can't think of any other example other than 40Bs in larger projects.
I agree. This is the
Okay,
first.
so
I guess one question.
One, we should just agree that the irrigation is needed, which, you know, and then, but maybe that's implied in our vote. And we're approving the, would we call it the advancement of the wells? And development would, advancement and development. So that would be the drilling and then the testing of the wells. Conditional to, and maybe we need to come up with, well, let me ask you, Matt, maybe, and Jeff. Is it once you drill the wells and see how deep you've gone and what kind of fractures you've encountered, then do we again revisit and discuss what some length of time would be for the testing? I would say minimum 2 days. And we'd also have to work out how we're going to reach out to people to even do monitoring, you know, and see who's willing to do it. And type of monitoring, like transducers, or what are you going to use? And
So I think sort of the question is, what information, what do you need in order to develop the plan for the pump testing?
I think first of all, and we can get some preliminary figures on what the potential yield would be as the drillers are drilling the wells. They have the ability to give rough estimates as to what the yield would be. So that would be the first driver. I mean, if we are seeing that either or both of our wells are low yielding, that's going to then determine how much we think we can get out of them. If we have high yielding wells and we know that we're going to have more water than possibly we're ever going to need, you know, based on Jeff Bowman's estimates of daily demands, you know, we don't necessarily need to take all the water that's available to us either that the well is making. So that's going to be the first driver. How much do we need and how much are we going to take is going to be the first determining factor. If we're theoretically planning on taking a larger number of gallons per day than something smaller, then that might require maybe a longer term test to allow the impacts to really reach out into the bedrock aquifer and see where the impacts are going to be. As far as reaching out to residents, you know, Geosphere, we do this kind of thing all the time. We'll consult well databases through town GIS, through boards of health, through the Mass DEP, and we'll try to reach out to as many people in all directions of our wells. Typically, we'll do certified letters. You know, we'll send out an informational mailing to say, here's what we're doing and why. What information do you have about your well? Are you willing to participate in the monitoring of this? And we get those letters sent back to us, and that's typically what our correspondence looks like. And that's how we kind of determine our monitoring network. And then, yes, we will use transducers, directly installed in people's wells. We'll do at least a week's worth of antecedent monitoring to understand, people's well usages prior to turning on the pumps in the irrigation wells to see what the background is, and then what, if any, impacts result in people's wells after we're doing the pumping test on our irrigation wells. So.
Okay, and is it critical that the pump test immediately follow the drilling, or having this lag in between where you're setting up to then decide how big?
There's no immediate need to
Okay.
do instant testing. I mean, if we'll drill the wells and it's just essentially a hole in the ground. So long as you're not taking anything out of it, there's no real immediate rush to jump right into a pumping test.
Okay, so I don't know, Matt and Julie and Rebecca, maybe it's a three-step process, whether we're agreeing that the irrigation wells are needed, then what kind of pump testing is going to go on, or yield testing, and then the irrigation management plan, something like that.
Yeah, I would think that probably we, one way to manage the process is we vote tonight on approval of the wells, and inherent is approval of their need, right? Then making it contingent upon board review of the pumping pump test plan and a butter notification plan prior to conducting those tests. And then further contingent upon board review of the irrigation management plan prior to use. I think that would be a way we could structure that potentially. I see we've got a hand up from Bob Murchison, but first, Bob, let me just see if anyone else on the board has comment. Rebecca or Julie, any comments on that?
Oh, I think that 3 steps sounds good.
I'm just not convinced we need them.
Fair.
You have depletion of the aquifer and all sorts of other issues leading to risks to drinking water, and I kind of feel like we should protect the natural resources. Our fields have done fine during the drought of the last 30 years, and now we're having more rain and things are doing better.
Yeah. Bob, do you have a comment? Mr. Murchison? You're on mute. I don't know if you're trying to speak.
I'm trying to unmute.
Oh, there we go.
Okay. Great. Sorry about that. I think somebody had me blocked, so I couldn't speak. Just 2 quick things. One, I'm not particularly opposed to this, but Daryl brought up what I think is a really important comparison, which is to 40B projects, both in the past and those that are proposed. And I just want to point out that what we're talking about in terms of peak usage is about triple the size of 40Bs previously built in town and those that are proposed. So this is triple the usage on a property of water. And I think that's important to remember. And then just the other thing I would say is that it's a little bit tricky, and you guys are in a tough spot here. But the town is going to spend potentially hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars on this project, and then you're going to find out that it doesn't work, right? That just seems a little tricky, and I don't know how to solve that problem. But I just want to point out that the problem is there, that we'll end up spending a lot of money as a town before we figure out whether you guys are going to be comfortable or not. So thank you.
Thanks, Bob, for the context. All right. So having said that, should we move ahead with sort of a proposal on that 3-step process? And then I think obviously that the second 2 steps are contingent upon a vote passing on placing the wells.
Yeah.
And so I think I can try to put together a motion. I think the question would be whether someone would be willing to move that we approve the 2 irrigation wells as proposed, contingent upon 1, board review of the plan for pump testing and a butter notification prior to conducting such testing, and 2, contingent upon review of the irrigation management plan prior to use of the wells for irrigation.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Seconded.
All right. Any further discussion from the board?
I will agree with Rebecca that I need to be convinced of the need.
Fair.
So would someone from the town who's been working on this project like to address that?
I can if no one else will.
Go ahead, Sean.
Give it a whirl.
Well, I'll remind everyone, we went to town meeting and voted against Recreation Commission putting in turf fields. And several people on this board and other boards basically said, come back with a plan to make good fields. And everyone knew that irrigation was part of that. That's a gravel pit. It needs to be irrigated to get good grass. Everyone knows that. This board was basically on board with how to do that. They came back with a plan. And here they are. We spent a lot of money. The select board has supported this. Town administration has supported this. There's ARPA funding for it. So it's a heck of a time to renege on it, because the grass is not just going to grow itself through a drought like last year.
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, I do agree. I remember we had concerns about the alternative, and we did sort of come back and say, hey, let's look at a sort of organic turf management plan, and agree that this seems to certainly be part of that. Rebecca, go ahead. Sorry, I just saw your hand went up.
Yeah, no, I mean, I have two children who were all-star athletes in Massachusetts. We did tons of sports the entire time they were going through school. And we also played on many turf fields. I'm not convinced we need those either. I think the fields are great and they did fine. And yeah, maybe they're not perfect, but that was because of the drought. And I think things are improving. And I still am not convinced of the need because of our fragile resources and lots of other things that maybe are more important, even though lots of people have different opinions on what we need. So as a Board of Health, I think maybe there are other things with a slightly greater priority for the drinking water resources.
It sounds like the devil is in the irrigation management plan to make sure that we can meet all of the needs the best that we can.
Yeah, I would agree. I think I sort of agree with this thing that we're putting in these checks to ensure that we're not having an excessive impact on surrounding wells and the wetlands, and that the plan seems reasonable. But it does put us in the position of we have to commit funds to get that far. But I think in the end, the checks are appropriate to ensure that this can be done in a safe and hopefully sustainable way. And that, in the end, if we spend all the money and find out that we don't feel this is a sort of safe option in terms of use for our natural resources, then that's unfortunate. But I still think we need to have the checks in place, but I don't think it stops us from moving forward.
Right, and I think what we're being asked, I think the financial decisions have been made at a different level, different departments in town. That's not in our purview. How water is used, though, is, and I guess I'm hopeful that we will find the most efficient way to use that water and minimalistic way to use the water. I will note now, it's going to save it for the irrigation management plan, but a lot of the materials I have read, again, from people who manage fields this way already, it's not two things. It's not the water that's the most important. It's how you enrich the soils in the field and you prep the soil. So we aren't thinking about trying to grow grass on gravel. We should be trying to grow grass on better quality soils. And also from what I've read, once a week at the most watering is what I see for people who are looking at for more sustainable management of natural grass fields. So, and with root depths approaching 18 inches if you can. So those are really different principles that, you know, there's a wide range to look at, and hopefully that could really reduce the water use. Because I too noted that that's a lot of water to be drawn compared to what we see for homes, which are drawing out a few hundred gallons a day for an individual home. So it's worth considering, but this is certainly much better than artificial turf. But I'd also agree with Rebecca that my daughter's had a very happy time and continues into adulthood, playing soccer all over the place, and it doesn't have to be on, certainly not artificial turf fields. I don't remember any of her teams liking that. And Laurel Fields was a wonderful place where she happily played many years. So.
All right, so I think we have a motion and a second. Is that correct? I remember that correctly?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yep.
I think that was our discussion. So having said that, I'll go ahead and start the voting. So Matt Beavers, aye.
Julie Dreyfus, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, nay.
Darrell Beardsley, aye.
All right. Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming and staying so late to help provide us with all the information. Gerald, do you want to
Look
stop?
forward to seeing you again, and you're going to be notifying Mark of drilling, just so he knows whenever that's happening. Mark being our health agent.
Yeah, I've spoken to Mark on at least one occasion.
Okay.
I guess my question would be, has the permit to drill been approved then?
Yes, we've approved the permit to drill. We're
Okay.
just asking that you come back to us with the plans for pump testing and notification prior to conducting those things.
Sure.
And I will need to know who to issue that license to, the permit. So I'll need to know who the licensed well driller will be.
Is that Mark? Is that you?
Yes, this is Mark Oram. with
Yeah.
the-
I can get you the driller's license. I have a copy of it on my office computer. I can get that emailed off to you.
That's fine. We just need to know the company name, contact,
Yep.
and if you want to provide their license number, that would be very helpful as well. Thank you.
The driller and the contact is already on the well permit application that we submitted. I do have the driller's license though, and I can get you a copy.
That's fine. Are they from what's the name of the company?
Cushing and Sons.
Okay, they're new to me, so that's okay. I think an introduction phone call to them would be helpful for me as well as them.
Okay, very well.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. As far as when drilling is going to take place, I need to touch base with the driller and get his schedule lined up. I know that there was some folks in the town that were interested in having this done before Labor Day. So I'll have to check in with his schedule and find out what their lineup is right now. So.
Okay, and before you go, so Mark, if they're new to town, that means they need to get a permit?
No, they get licensed by the state of Massachusetts. So as long as
all
they're
right.
the
Okay.
state of Massachusetts license, but I'd like to have a conversation with them since they may be new to our regulations. And it's always helpful to have that like pre-construction review beforehand. So that's why I wanted to do that, just to help them out as well.
All right. We good? I think if further questions, you guys can take it offline with Mark to clarify the process.
Thank you.
Okay, so I think with that, we've completed agent's business. Chair's business. We have discussion of the comments on the Coolidge Street Homes 40B. Pull those up. Hopefully everyone had a chance to review these. Similar to comments we've made in other situations. I think as usual, Daryl, you well addressed the concerns unique to the town.
This is the first time I've seen any version of this, Daryl, just because I've been here for such a short time, and I thought you did a great job.
Any other comments on this, or?
I agree.
Yeah, I will say it was very thorough. Nice job, Daryl.
Thanks.
I will say that Daryl gave me the opportunity to comment before it was submitted, and I had nothing to add. So that's a testament to how good it is, because I can usually find something to add. But no, this was good overall. Thank you for taking that on again.
So
All right.
is the board going to vote to send this then to the select board?
Didn't we already? I thought we authorized the sending last time.
We provided them a draft with the caveat that the final version would be forthcoming after this meeting. So
Okay, then we should vote. So do I have a motion to approve this version as final and forward to the select board?
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? Matt Beavers, aye.
Julie Dreyfus, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Carol Beardsley, aye.
Great. Next, ZBA petitions for hearings on 9/6/23. Daryl, can you comment on that off the top of your head while I try to pull it up? Here we go.
Yeah, so, well, a couple of things. They're going to be discussing Greenwood Street development and Farm Road development, right? How come I'm not seeing that right now?
I just see Greenwood Street.
Yeah, I just see Greenwood. Okay, I thought it was both. And whether anything related to Board of Health would be discussed that night, then we would be missing it.
Oh no,
I guess
Farm
we
Road
could-
is on there. Yes, Farm.
Yeah,
Thanks, Ellen.
Farm Road is at the end.
It's at the end there.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Okay.
That's what I thought. All right. So for either one of those, I don't know if maybe they're discussing street width and that sort of thing first, but it'd be nice to know. Because it coincidentally is, you know, on one of the 2 days in a month that we have a meeting. And then let's see. Special permit to operate a retail store with signage. I'm a little unclear, Ellen, if that is the permit to have the retail store, which we just, I think I don't know, they have to get permits from us anyway and keep up to date with that. Signage, I don't think has much of an issue for us unless they were putting up new signage, but it says, okay. I assume it's just maintaining current signage. As opposed to driving something into the ground that's going to puncture a water line or what have you. So,
yeah, I don't know. Typically we get the actual application and any backup information along with this legal notice. And I asked for it, but they haven't provided it to me yet, the select board office.
yeah. And then the permit to renovate a pre-existing non-conforming house, I'd say our usual things go of that still has to be reviewed by Board of Health for compliance of the renovated home with Board of Health regulations or
I would ask,
requirements.
and I agree, Daryl, I would ask for more information on that. Not for sure what they're doing at 6 Curve Street.
Yeah.
All right, so it sounds like we need to get sort of more information. Regardless, it's unfortunately coincident with our meeting, so we probably can't attend. So I think if we hear further details before then, should we? I don't know if there's anything much we can do.
No, and I think we have given them guidance just to say to remind the people, say, for example, Taylor and Liz Ting, that once they have the ZBA permit, then they need to keep going to other boards and committees. So they need to file a building application, and that should lead to the contact with Board of Health and review. And so,
All right.
but I think they're used to that.
Yeah.
It's really the other two things. And I know they've talked about addressing different issues at different meetings. So as long as they're not planning to cover Board of Health related issues where either they'd have to repeat it or we would need to go watch a meeting, but then there's not the back and forth dialogue, so which can be more helpful in a meeting.
So is it worth, can we just let them know that we have a coincident meeting and won't be able to have a representative? And
Yeah, I did send an email saying, right, what did they suggest?
All right, well, hopefully we will hear back on that.
Okay, I can send my typical letter to the ZBA to include the one for the 6 Curve Street. And just note that for the 240Bs that, you know, the Board of Health can't attend on that night, just so that they're, I know, Daryl, you said you've already let them know, but that.
Yeah, no, I think it should come from, I was sending it early today, just in case they could give an answer on that and we could discuss it now, but I didn't see anything. So yeah, I think a comprehensive letter about all 4 of these issues would be good.
Okay.
All right. Anything else on this? Okay. What else do we have? So working our way down, we have a number of items under other business. We have the Mass DEP annual notice, we have the public water supply notices, the Council on Aging we addressed, vegetation management, and then minutes. So let's just start working our way down. So the Mass DEP annual notice to local boards of health. Daryl, I'm going to tap you again to comment on this because you got the most experience while I try to find it.
I remember thinking there was something interesting, but I can't. At this moment.
Here we go.
There's a good description of the public water supplies at the end.
31. The water supply definitions in the public or private flow chart. We'll try to go over that if we want to look at it quickly.
Daryl, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Who, just within the structure of the board, it looks like there has to be some type of confirmation that they know all the public water supplies that actually exist and nothing's changed. Who does that?
Well, Mark has done some information, and we're tapping on the Groundwater Protection Committee, who has the ARPA funds for the intern who's been mapping water supplies, so for the private. And so they're going to be reaching out and sharing the GIS mapping that's been done thus far in town, and other data on the wells that are all from Board of Health files, and some of which was put into a database years ago that they're weaving together now. So they're also going to be looking for a new intern, just by the way, if anyone knows of anybody who's a student who would be interested in GIS work. We've had 2 really wonderful interns thus far, done a nice job and mapped a lot of things in town.
Yeah, that's the page, the very last page.
Very last page, yeah. There's these definitions. This flow chart sort of goes through what they are, and then this is a good definition of it, which I think is useful for us because this does come up from time to time.
Yeah, right. So community is basically residents living in homes, and that's a much trickier thing than the other 2. Non-transient, non-community would be, some of what I've had for clients where they're operating business facilities where it's non-transient because you have the same populations, the same workforce coming repeatedly and drinking the same water all the time, but it's not a community. They don't reside there. So if you have a really big issue with your water supply, you can send everyone home is an option. But when you're supplying water to residences, it really ratchets up the responsibilities because it has to be 24/7. And then the transient non-community, think of restaurants, different people coming through all the time. So not drinking that same water as their only source or major source.
All right.
So one thing I wonder if, we could put it in recommendations to systems that are bigger than just a single family home and the backflow prevention. Mark, have we had much of that in town to look at the cross connection backflow prevention?
Not that I'm aware of it, Daryl.
Yeah, there are recommendations in here about that. And it's good guidance that we could just copy and provide to things like 59 North Main Street.
Yeah, that's the one that comes to mind, 59.
Yeah, it's simple, relatively simple. Yeah. And they're also engineered simple solutions where you put in, say, a hose spigot outside that the water just can't flow backwards in case the hose somehow is sucking something up from somewhere.
All right. So it sounds like good resource for us to have as we move forward with this. Let's look at the vegetation management plan. So this is, I think, similar in spirit to what we've received for the railroad, but this is for Eversource. We tend to receive these regularly. Oh, this is the short version, sorry. Basically letting us know they're going to be supplying herbicides alongside the power lines. This is the detailed one, right?
So I'll have to confess, too many things came up for me to read this. It's been a busy week. So does anyone feel that we should respond? And if so, might we just use what we used before, similar of concerns and
I think that's reasonable.
something?
I think it's similar to like what we've responded to the railroad and to this in the past. Just make sure we document our concerns about private wells.
Mm-hmm. Does anyone want to do that? I don't want to rob anyone else of the joy.
You do it so well, Daryl, and I think you've done it in the past. I'm happy to review. If you have one of your prior drafts you want to adapt, I'm happy to review it. But I think probably better that I'm not the one that writes it de novo.
Do we have a due date on that?
Does not seem that way.
I didn't get the impression that they were truly looking for a response.
Oh,
they're not.
Just
But we sent one anyway.
Not reading accurately, but it looked like it was not looking for any response.
Yeah. No, I think they typically are not, and I think typically our responses don't do a whole lot, but we tend to send them. Sean, do you have a comment on this? Sean, I see your hand up, but you're on mute, trying to talk.
I was just going to ask, why do you feel like you need to respond?
We probably don't. but we
I mean,
usually,
if they don't do herbicide, they have to do mechanical. Do you want mechanical?
From a
what Fred
groundwater
said.
protection perspective, yeah.
Yes, why not?
Yeah. Really? And then the
Or-
invasives take off through the corridor, and then what?
I understand it's a very difficult balance.
Oh, it
But it's
definitely is.
also
You
letting
live
them
it,
know
right?
that we have drinking water wells here that not everybody has, scattered throughout the town, and a nudge in the direction of using only what's necessary.
we can
it's
acknowledge
a
that.
delicate
We can
balance,
acknowledge in our
okay.
response that it's a delicate balance and that neither option is ideal, right?
Right.
Right. But no
And I
option's
know
not ideal either.
Conservation Commission wrestles with this all the time.
Well, do you want to, I mean, since there's not a deadline, do you want to draft something and we can discuss it at the next meeting?
I'll try to. How about that? Since
Sounds-
there's not a deadline, it's gonna have to
Understood.
wait in line for whatever else is ahead of it.
Okay. I'm trying to remember what was next. We're getting down to the bitter end here. Oh yes, public water supplies. We did the power lines, public water supplies, and then minutes is all we have left. So we have the annual reports on the various public water supplies in town. I will try to find them. Here's Woodhaven. As I recall, these are, as we know, because these are regulated as public water supplies, these are required. As I recall, they are provided to the residents impacted. And we're noting receipt as well. I didn't note anything of dramatic note in either of them.
Yeah, I thought the other one for the fields didn't have PFAS results.
Yeah, I'll pull that up.
And I'm not sure if that's because, I don't know why. Oh,
That was Woodhaven. I'll try to find the fields.
okay.
Here's fields. Yeah, I don't see it there.
Yeah. I thought it was an interesting one not to be present.
Yeah. Nope. Here we are. There's a comment on it.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't finish reading through it, everything to see if they said why they didn't include it.
Yeah, they don't. They note that there is a standard, but it's not reported.
I thought the other interesting thing, I forget which one it was. I think Woodhaven has something like just under 10 PFAS. Leland next door is the high teens, and then the town hall well is 20, roughly. Those are all rough numbers. You know, so they're close together, but it just shows that levels go up and down, groundwater's moving. It's hard to predict.
Here we are. 10, 15. Okay. So receipt is noted. Those are provided to all the residents of those that are impacted. So they'll have a chance to review them. I think, unless there's further comment on that, I think the last thing was minutes. I reviewed, I had minor edits, if any. I don't think I actually had any.
It was small grammatical things. It was nothing of substance.
So do I have a motion to approve the minutes from the 7/19 meeting?
So moved.
I'll second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none. Matt Beavers, aye.
Julie Dreyfus, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Carol Beardsley, aye.
All right. And then finally, unless anyone can see anything I missed, our agenda items for the 6th. And so we have already forgotten because it's been so long. That's the meeting. Is that the meeting where we're meeting early to discuss the, is that where we continue the regulation review?
No, that's October.
That's
I can
October,
tell-
right? Yeah, that's October 4th.
So
Um,
there will be 3 variance hearings.
Okay.
You'll be discussing the heritage, the engineering report. And then 81 Brush Hill Road, a discussion with the owners. I'll invite the owners about the rental and something else.
Oh, I guess maybe what they're planning in general.
Yeah, I
Oh,
think we
we're gonna
authorized
issue
Mark
the
to send,
order.
yeah, we authorized Mark to send, to issue the order, and then,
Okay.
and then we're gonna want to meet with them to discuss how they're gonna fix that.
And we're gonna review the complaint that was received from D.
Oh, yeah, the complaint.
Yeah. All right, so we have that, we have heritage. We have 3 variance hearings.
Yeah.
Which complaint are we reviewing for? Sorry, I've lost track. The
That was
pumping out of the
the
cesspool.
pumping out of the cesspool.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
okay.
And I just heard word from the abutter who was in our office today that they, the test results of the well were okay.
That's good.
Yes, it was good news.
All right, I'm sure other things will come up, but that seems reasonable for now. I don't know that I have anything in particular I want to add to that as of yet.
Agree.
All right, so with that, we're gonna just make it before 11 p.m., I think.
Yep.
I hope not to speak again for at least 36 hours. But the last thing I'll say is ask for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second,
Any discussion? Matt Beaver's aye.
Julie Dreyfus, aye.
Rebecca Honeywell, aye.
Daryl, aye.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Matt.
Problem.